And Jay.
Let's isolate that.
Yeah. Why not? All right. Linda, I'm ready to start whenever you are then, so. I guess we're waiting for, Judge Smith is not here yet.
Is there anyone we left off?
In the whole world?
I mean,
We're going to try to be as succinct as we can be.
right here too.
Linda, are you okay to start? Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for being at the Joint Committee of the Public Safety and the Health and Human Services Committee. There are a lot of speakers who are going to be interested in this discussion, and I want to be very clear. I think that my colleagues, I believe, will agree with this, that this is going to be the first of several sessions. We're not going to solve everything today, for sure. The focus of the first session is on youth who are staying in the community and the system of diversion and services. Good morning, Your Honor. There are things we are not addressing at today's session, like detention or residential treatment, that we should also talk about at a later date. The committee is going to hear from the judges that are sitting at the desk right now, from Judge Greenberg and Judge Smith, so that we can have their overall comments and observations about how the juvenile justice system is working and what needs to be done to improve it. Frank Duncan will provide the committee with an overview of juvenile process so that the committee has a common baseline and understanding, since the juvenile process is very different from the adult process. Elijah Wheeler from the Collaboration Council, who's been working on these issues for many years, will provide some information on best practices and national models. The Department of Health and Human Services will give us a presentation on 1, school-based mental health services, 2, services for youth in the child welfare system and the crossover youth practice model, 3, the Youthful Offender Partnership, and 4, screening and assessment services, or SASCA, and 5, some joint DJS-DHHS services. Carol Jones Pinkney from Everymind will provide us with a brief overview of a pilot program that is no longer funded that served children in need of supervision and their families, and comment on the successes and its challenges. And then I will ask Carlotta Woodward of the State's Attorney's Office, Mary Siegfried of the Public Defender's Office, and Shelley Brown, a private practice attorney, to provide their comments and perspectives. I would like to have Montgomery County Public Schools provide their comments, and I'd like to have MCPS hear the other comments, since I think that there will be issues raised about coordination with the schools, which then they can then discuss with us. And with that, I'm going to ask everybody to please be as succinct as they possibly can. We actually have other meetings today, so we don't want this to go forever, but we do want to get to solving this issue. And with that, Linda, if you would like to have anything that you would like to add before we hear from the judges.
I just want to say it's very exciting that the council is coming back together around this issue. These issues are not new. In fact, I included some information from a 2016 OLO report, but for this council, it's an opportunity to delve into the issues and to look at some of, particularly I think, the disparities that occur in the system and the coordination that needs to occur in the system between not just the judicial branch and executive branches of county government, but also state government and MCPS. And so hopefully we can make a work plan after you have this briefing and determine how the Joint Committee wants to continue to move forward.
Thank you. And before we begin, I was going to ask the chair of HHS if he had anything to say.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think we are fortunate in Montgomery County to have some really fantastic departments and agencies and a judicial branch, as well as programs and services that really get it, that really understand the complexities of these issues. But despite all that, and despite all that infrastructure, we know that we still have a lot of challenges. And so this is an all-hands-on-deck situation. I know this council is particularly committed to looking at system building. How can we more cohesively fuse these great programs and entities and agencies all doing such fantastic work together. And what are some of the best practices across the country that we can draw from? Some of them are right here in Montgomery County. But this is, of course, a critical discussion and conversation that impacts thousands of families and really our entire community in a variety of different ways. So look forward to the conversation, and I want to thank everybody for your hard work.
Thank you very much. Judge Greenberg, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman Katz, Mr. Chairman Albornoz, and members of the committee. My name is Robert Greenberg. I'm the administrative judge for the Circuit Court across the street, and I thank you for the opportunity to speak with you regarding these juvenile issues that are very significant. So we are the proverbial tip of the iceberg. Not all cases involving juveniles are going to end up in our court, but we obviously welcome consideration of programs that may further help people that are on probation to us or that divert cases from our court as well. So to the extent that we're considering services and programs that are actually adjudicated, I thought it might be helpful to give you some statistics on what we see on a daily basis. So for fiscal year 2019, we had 35,000 new cases of all types filed in our court, and nearly 49% of them were family or juvenile cases. So as you may know, because there's such a strong correlation between the disintegration of the family unit and juvenile behavior, we actually have a 1F, 1J, one family, one judge designation, which we employ in family law cases where there may be an overlap with SINA issues, child in need of assistance, or delinquency issues. But that's a relatively small universe of cases that we have. We have 73 at the present time. The total number of purely juvenile cases, so that would be SINA, child in need of assistance, delinquency, peace orders, termination of parental rights, was 3,232 in fiscal year 2019. So to hear those cases, we have in our rotation 2 dedicated judges, literally and figuratively, but they do nothing but family and SINA cases. And we have 2 judges who do virtually nothing but the delinquency cases. We're excited to report that thanks to the assistance of the council, we are now actively recruiting and interviewing for a juvenile magistrate position, which we anticipate will start sometime probably November or December timeframe. That person will, in effect, supplant one of the judges and free that judge up for other duties. We've worked with the sheriff, court personnel, state's attorney's office, PD's office to set the parameters for that person's work, and initially at least that person will handle scheduling matters that ordinarily would have been handled by a judge, and also they'll be able to take pleas and then eventually hear trials, which we call adjudications in the juvenile system. Because of the anticipated rollout of the MDEC, Maryland Electronic Court System, which is now scheduled for February 2020, we are unable to institute any kind of new dockets or initiatives or specialty courts. I'm sure that will change at some point, and obviously, depending upon the nature of the specialty court, we need the permission of the administrative office of the courts. But for now, we're kind of hamstrung with what we can do in that area. So let me just say, before you hear from Judge Smith, who actually has boots on the ground, she's in that rotation right now, the delinquency rotation. I do hear anecdotally from people that one of the shortcomings that we have at this point are the children who would be called children in need of supervision, not assistance. Children in need of supervision, as you know, are children who have perhaps good parents who are maybe at their wits' end. They haven't committed crimes, but they're misbehaving, they're acting out. I think, Mr. Katz, you referred earlier to the pilot program, which I think we're going to hear about, that was in effect for, I think, 3 or 4 years here in the state in various jurisdictions, including Montgomery County, which provided services to that group of young people who had not offended yet, and with the idea towards making sure they wouldn't offend. That is a real gap that we have. That program is gone, and that's something that I hear about from people that we wish could come back to us. We have limited resources, as does the state and HHS. We understand that, but My juvenile judges do have frustrations they express to me from time to time, and Judge Smith will tell you about some of them in just a moment. She's currently in the delinquency rotation. We've talked about some of these problems, and I'd like you to hear from her because, as I said, she's actually experiencing them on a daily basis. Judge Carla Smith.
Good morning.
Good morning, Your Honor. Thank you for being here.
Chairman Alvarez, members of the County Council. I'm really thrilled.
Oh, you need to come here. There you go. Thank you.
Really, thank you. Really thrilled to be here this morning to talk about this issue because I think that there are a lot of things happening in juvenile court that need discussing and that need the light to be shined on them so that we can address them. A little bit about the community that we see in juvenile court. Different than the CINA community, Children in Need of Assistance community, the parents who come into juvenile court aren't parents who are neglecting their kids or not abusing their kids. They're parents who want their kids to turn out to be good citizens. But they're also parents who many times are overwhelmed. They're overwhelmed generally. Maybe they're single parent families where mom is working 2 jobs and just isn't home with the kids and able to look after them because she's working so hard. They're low income many times. They're immigrant families. There are language barriers, lack of familiarity with our education system, lack of familiarity with the justice system. They are many times parents who maybe only have a high school diploma. Maybe they don't even have that. So they have that burden as well in terms of figuring out how to navigate what their child's experiencing, whether it's in the school system or whether it's in the courts. Many times, the parents who, if I ask them in court, does your child have an IEP or a 504 plan, they may not be able to answer me because they're just not sure. They don't understand exactly how our systems work. If the child does have an IEP or a 504 plan, and I ask them, well, why? They may not know. They don't know if it's an educational or emotional disability or a learning disability. The child has ADHD. And I ask the child or I ask the parent, how does this manifest itself? I think it probably is manifesting itself in that impulse control, right, in that decision making. Many times the parents can't explain or they don't know what the diagnosis is. So we're dealing with kind of those sorts of things with the parents. With respect to the children, many times these children are they have emotional disabilities, learning disabilities, ADHD, mental health issues, substance abuse. Anecdotally, most of the kids who come into juvenile court are smoking marijuana. And if you ask them why, they can't tell you why. Do I think it's because there are other things going on with them, mental health issues or maybe history of maltreatment that's never been dealt with? Sure. So drug use is very rampant in this population. Truancy. They are in large part truant. They may not go to school at all. If they go to school, they are in large part failing their classes. They're in 9th grade for the 2nd time, the 3rd time, and so we wonder why they're not engaged in school anymore. Why would they want to be, right? That's right. Lack of after-school activities. When I ask these children, again, this is anecdotal. When I ask these children, what do you do when you get home from school if they're going to school? Nothing. So when kids who don't have anything to do are going to go out and get in trouble. So where does the court, and I would be remiss if I didn't say this because this is a big issue. These are largely minority children. They are African American males and they are Hispanic males. When I look at the statistics that were published by the Department of Juvenile Services, talks about intake complaints. 52% are African American, 15% are white, 31% are Hispanic. I didn't see in the manual where it talks about the cases that are actually petitioned. Those statistics in terms of blacks and Hispanics skyrocket. when you talk about the cases that are actually petitioned, the cases that are actually coming into court, you're not seeing white children coming into court. It's just not happening. What's the court's role in all of this? Obviously, we see these kids once they've been petitioned, once the case has been charged. Our role is, the juvenile court system's role is rehabilitation, but to rehabilitate, you need the tools. And the fact that these children have committed offenses really is a symptom. I think everybody knows it. It's a symptom of a larger issue. So we have, obviously, the court works with the public schools. There is a MCPS liaison who works with the court. I will tell you, I started, and this is not meant to throw anybody under the bus, but I want to paint the picture for you because I understand everybody has limited resources. I began my juvenile rotation in January of this year. I did not meet the liaison for the school system until I started making calls and emailed and said, please, please, please come into my courtroom, because I have kids in court every day who have IEPs, have 504 plans, or after they have a psychological evaluation, need IEPs or 504 plans. And again, we're dealing with, in large part, a population with parents who are overwhelmed or who don't know how to pursue these things. Is that the role of the judge who's hearing these cases? Probably not. But when I compare, but if my role is rehabilitation, right? Do what's best for the child. When I compare what we do in CINA, Child in Need of Assistance cases, right? We have social workers who come in, they assess the kids, they are constantly assessing the children, and when the court says, I want X, Y, and Z to occur, that social worker makes sure that X, Y, and Z occurs. In the juvenile system, we work with the Department of Juvenile Services, and we have put children on probation, and we say, I want them to see a psychiatrist. I want to follow up. I want a medication consult. Does this child need meds for their ADHD? Juvenile Services only has so many resources, and they're not, the probation officers or case managers are not trained social workers. So, and they don't necessarily know all the places to find resources within the community. So that's one thing, one battle we have. We have the MCPS liaison who wears 3 different hats, as I learned. And realistically, if we had someone in the courtroom every day, I would have work for him every day, working with these kids, trying to figure out how are we going to get them back into the classroom. So if I was to, in my fantasy world, say what I think would be great for our juvenile justice system, 1, to keep kids out of the courtroom, which is the ultimate goal, but 2, once they're in the courtroom, manage them in a way to keep them from returning to the courtroom. I would say, look at your Family Justice Center, because the Family Justice Center is a one-stop shop where victims of domestic violence walk in the door and can figure out, with all the different service providers, how to escape what they're running from, right? Escape that violent home. Our kids need a place where they can walk in the door and they can receive all the services that they need, be it mental health, substance abuse, get them back in school, assist them in figuring out, maybe they're not a college kid. Maybe what we need to be doing is focusing on trade. So in the perfect world, I would say Montgomery County needs to figure out how to supplement what DJS is doing, because there aren't services for girls. When the kids get out of detention, it takes months to get them into services when they're placed on probation. They're languishing that whole time while they're waiting. They get out of detention. They don't necessarily walk into school the next day. It might take 2 weeks. What are they doing during that 2-week period? Are they getting back into trouble? So I could talk about this issue all day. I will not. I appreciate your time and I appreciate your listening.
And first off, thank you both for all that you're doing, and we're going to hear from Mr. Duncan if he could start coming towards the table. But, okay, just one second. Your Honor, are both of you able to stay the whole time or most of? 10:30. Okay, well, we'll keep that in mind. Craig, did you have a question?
Yeah. Well,
For Judge Smith?
yeah, for both. Yeah, actually.
Yeah.
So, Judge Smith, because you brought up something at the very end, which is what I put in my notes about domestic violence cases that come through the court system. And there we have a robust system, Court Watch and other volunteers who are connecting those individuals directly with services as well as resources in the community, all of that, a long list of all the things. And we've prided ourselves not only from that perspective, but then also when it comes to the exchange of children. I know it all too well, involved with my own family, to where utilizing that system to be able to do exchange and seeing how that works is tremendous. It's one of those where I think we need that same kind of system set for our young people, and that same sort of resource network that's there, but a person to also handhold them, because you're right. I can only imagine if English is my second language and I'm coming and I'm an African immigrant and I'm walking into that courtroom and trying to navigate the system, and somebody asks me about an IEP and I don't even know what those symbols mean, let alone whatever. And then to say that I'm then to argue as a counterpart may that, well, this is the particular, and Your Honor, based on this, I want to ask for community service and know what to ask for and all the things, and based on this and this loophole and that, and therefore the child walks out, but this child, because of what you're presented with, right? And so that's the thing, have to make that decision. Those things aren't afforded to them. And that's the reason why I feel as though we have so many that are overrepresented in our jails. It's because they don't have that initial, you're right at the start, that there's higher presentation, and we're working on those kinds of things as well before they come into your courtroom. But even once they come into your courtroom, they have no idea what to do. And so from that perspective, I'm wondering if something like that you see that gives great representation for our folks who are involved in domestic violence would be something that you think would be successful when it comes to our young people who are also involved in the court system.
Thank you. Absolutely. I think that they come back into court, right? I bring them back into court maybe every 30 days, 60 days, just check in. What's happening? Have you done this? Have you done that? They come back in. I finally get the kid to the point where mom has a prescription for him for his ADHD meds. And then mom comes in and tells me, they're $100. I can't afford it. I don't know what to do with that.
Exactly.
And that's not my role.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
But if we had a place where these families could go before the kid ends up in court, while they're in court, after the kid's in court, where everybody who's providing services could come together and be servicing these children, I'm not a betting person, but I would bet we would really see a reduction in the number of kids who are coming into court.
And I think our youth opportunity centers that we're just starting to stand up throughout the county, I mean, some of them are doing well, but we don't have enough, and they don't have enough resources, would be a great place to start in terms of looking at a model that we could utilize throughout the county.
You're telling me something I don't know about. I've never heard of the Youth Opportunity Center.
See, and these are the things where, again, that connectivity together between Luis Cardona, who heads up our street outreach network and who does great work there, our Department of HHS. This is why, again, that listing of resources, something that, again, we've built for our domestic violence. We have all the things there. We know all the things that you can refer folks to. The judges are aware of them. Everybody's aware. But we haven't done a good job of doing that and making folks aware of all the resources that are there when it comes to our youth.
I think you need to factor in one more thing.
Sure.
You were talking about children who don't drive,
Yes.
who don't have transportation, whose parents are working multiple hours. So you have to factor in how these kids are going to get to these places so that they can receive these services, because that's another issue. The parents can't necessarily take them.
Well, kudos to Councilmember Glass, who spearheaded the effort this year to make sure that we had free ride-on throughout Montgomery County all the time, 24/7 for our young people. So now they can, even though the schedules aren't, and that's the other thing, right? So now we have this free ride-on for youth all the time. And so that's going to tremendously help when it comes to getting places. Still isn't where we need to be in terms of robust service. But thank you very much for this. You have opened our eyes to a lot of issues that we need to address. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And let me ask, and Councilmember Albanese has a question as well. But, Hucker, I'm sorry. These lights are just lovely up here. How many judges actually hear juvenile cases?
Well, the ones that
You're going to, yeah.
the ones that are in the rotation now would be 4 in number. 2 for SINA, 2 for delinquency, and then we're going to be having the juvenile magistrate beginning as well.
Okay. Thank you. Councilmember Hucker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was going to bring this up later in the presentation, but anyway, it seems this is exactly what I wanted to talk about, and I got at a little bit last time we had this same presentation. Judge Smith and Judge Greenberg, thank you very much for your commitment to our young people and your service, and I wanted to hone in on what you're saying, Judge Smith, about the need for not just after-school program, not just transportation, not just Medicaid, but a real program that's ongoing that diverts young people and keeps them in contact with services and minimizes their contact with the legal system, right?
Yes.
I'm wondering how much you've looked at specialty courts in other jurisdictions as models for what we might need here?
I actually have not looked at the specialty courts. I will tell you, like I said, I've been in juvenile court since January, and I have spent most of my time trying to get up to speed and manage my caseload. I haven't looked. I don't know if Judge Greenberg's ever.
I can say that the only models that involve specifically juveniles of which I'm aware would be the truancy courts. I don't know that there's any other model. And frankly, because DJS is a state agency, the funding is limited. If the model is going to come from anywhere, it's going to come from our county for obvious reasons.
If I could.
I was going to say that Elijah Wheeler is going to speak about, from the Collaboration Council, is going to speak later about best practices and whatnot.
Okay, good. I'm looking forward to hearing that. But if I could just mention, D.C. has 2 specialty courts for juveniles. And I've become familiar with them because my wife works for one of them for the last 8 years since its inception. And one's a mental health court for youth with primary mental health diagnoses called the Juvenile Behavioral Diversion Program that she helps to coordinate. Then there's a second specialty court that's much newer for youth at risk or involved with commercial sexual exploitation, the CSEC court. And so far, the data they've built up over the last 8 years indicate that they're reducing recidivism. I'm sure they're saving the district costs and reducing. The real bottom line is they're reducing interactions with the legal system, because the data show the more often young people come into contact with the legal system, the worse the outcomes get down the road. They have a coordinated group of agencies coordinated by that court system between DBH and the court system, their Department of Behavioral Health, that does all the things you're saying need to be done that aren't your job, frankly, right? Have social workers, clinical social workers that are trained working with either the juveniles alone or juveniles and their families to connect them to Medicaid, to transportation, to after-school programs, to the school system, all those things to make sure that they have the wraparound services they need so that they don't recidivate and they appear back in court and can report on their progress. And I know Carl Racine is on board and wants to divert as many youth as possible because of the progress these courts have made. They began, I remember when my wife was involved in the creation of these, they began, her boss especially, went all over the country looking at courts in California and Texas and Pennsylvania, and they have now had many representatives from other jurisdictions come see them, recently from Philly and Miami and even from folks from overseas. And this is the first time since I've been on the council in 5 years we've had, I think, all the agencies in the room that would need to be involved in creating something like this. And I just wanted to see if there's interest in, if we could assemble a delegation and just hop on the red line and go down to Judiciary Square, we could observe their court and their processes and begin a more robust discussion of how to replicate that here.
Mr.
I
Hooker,
know I can get us an invitation if you want one.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but could you tell me if you know whether, are these diversionary courts or are they courts
They are.
after a person has already been in our court?
No, they're a diversionary court.
Okay, because
So
I
they've
think-
offended, many times they haven't ever been diagnosed, and the goal is to keep them out of the legal system.
Yeah, because that's a significant consideration, because I think the Administrative Office of Courts in the state of Maryland would have to get involved if this were a post-adjudication type of a court. So if it's something that prevents people from actually coming to court, maybe even literally in the building, that's not the AOC's concern. But I think when we're talking about a specialty court, there may have to be involvement and approval by the Administrative Office of the Courts in the state of Maryland. Do you understand the distinction that I'm trying to point out?
I think so.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. And I do think it should be pointed out that the collaborative case management model that's used at the Montgomery County Correction Facility is a collaboration model. I mean, that's what we're attempting to do. So we will try to get that working through this as well. But thank you both we'll see if we can actually let you leave at this point to sit down. But
Thank you.
And Mr. Duncan, if you could please give us an overview.
Sure. Thank you for having me, Frank Duncan, Department of Juvenile Services. I was asked to come here and kind of walk you through the decision-making points of our agency as it relates to the delinquents and the SINs complaints that we get. When a youth most of our complaints come through police arrest. In Montgomery County, a few come in through citizen complaints. When we get those, we make a decision. We meet with the family. We reach out to the victims. We reach out to the police officers. We schedule what we call an intake conference. That intake conference time, we review the youth's mental health, education, substance abuse, family situation. We do a risk needs instrument to help guide us with our decision making. We have 1 of 3 decisions that we can make at that point. We can resolve a case, which basically means we are closing it out with a warning. Maybe somebody is a first offender, minor offense, no damage, move them, throughout. We can also do what we call pre-court. Pre-court is where we have identified a youth has certain needs. We try to connect them with the needs, either maybe get them evaluated through SASCA, who I know is here as well. We also have some other community programs. We can provide individual family counseling. We can provide a little bit of supervision. We use the CHOICE program, which is a community-based supervision program where they meet with the families several times a week, go to school, check in, that kind of stuff. We have them, we work with the parents through a program called MST that does a lot of parent education and training as counseling as well. If the youth are successful with that, we resolve it, case is closed. If they're not, then we have to make a decision whether to go ahead and resolve it anyway or to forward it to the state's attorney's office for formal petitioning. If we decide to resolve either initially or at the pre-court level, the victim and the complainant actually have a right to appeal that decision directly to the state's attorney's office to have court involvement. If a youth ends up in court after we forward it to the court or to the state's attorney's office, if they filed a petition, the youth goes to court, they get adjudicated. If they're found involved, well, if they're found not involved, obviously the case is gone and everyone's out. They're found involved, most of the time the court goes to what we call in Montgomery County temporary disposition. That's a period of time where usually the courts will either request certain evaluations, our agency will do social histories, we will do what we call an MCAS, which is again another risk needs screening tool, and then we will make recommendations to the court. Those recommendations can be for either probation with services or for commitment. I will walk you through a little bit on those. The probation conditions often are stuff such as community service, again, counseling. We don't have a lot of resources, but we utilize the resources that we do have. We have MST, FFT, Functional Family Therapy, as I mentioned, CHOICE. We have Institute for Family Centered Services, which is also another counseling, both individual and family. I mentioned choice. We can get them. We have a contract with Journeys, which does outpatient substance abuse treatment. So those are some of the services that we offer. But we also provide supervision, and we work with youth and the families. So if families come in and say they need some help, we're going to do what we can. Now, we may not have the resources, but what we do is we do have a part of our agency we call our resource department. Our resource department are people who have knowledge of both community and residential programs, and not just DJS programs, but also the county programs. We've actually developed a resource guide here for Montgomery County of different locations and type of services. And so our worker, along with their supervisor, would meet with this resource person and try to identify where and what type of programs the youth needs and make those referrals, and then follow up with them to make sure that they're engaged. Because as you heard Judge Smith talk about, sometimes the parents aren't as great at following through, and sometimes we have to be more assertive with them to get them to comply. I will tell you that most of our community-based programs that we utilize, because we recognize the issue of transportation, are home-based. They will go to the home. They will go to the community and meet with the youth, meet with the family. So we eliminate some of those barriers that we talk about. We don't eliminate all of them, obviously, but we eliminate the ones that we can. If probation isn't an option and we are looking for a commitment, or if a youth has violated probation, and I should indicate that our department over the last several years, as part of our role, has implemented what we call our graduated responses, and we call it AIM, basically where we provide incentives as well as sanctions based on youth behaviors in the community. So if a youth is making all his appointments, we give them a small reward. It's not much because we don't have a whole lot of resources, but maybe a snack. Maybe we get tickets donated to us to a Nationals game. So we try to use those type of incentives. We also do sanctions. We do things such as have them write essays, add additional community service hours, maybe make up more office appointments. Maybe we need to have more supervision, increase the supervision level. We also, through those graduate sanctions, we got through the court. We also will do stuff like GPS if needed. If it we can refer you to our evening reporting center, which is a detention alternative that the department actually runs, but we also utilize it as a graduated sanction to try to keep as many kids in the community as possible to get the services they need. I don't think there's anyone who would disagree. If you can keep kids in the community with their families, that's the best chance for success most of the time. So we try to use all the resources we have to do that. If we have, as I said, if we have to file a violation, that means we've done our AIM process. We filed a violation. We've staffed the cases you heard me talk about earlier with the resource people, and we've identified, okay, this youth needs to be removed from the community, and these are the programs that we would be recommending. The department does have contracts with various programs. We have group homes. We work with residential treatment centers. We have our own behavioral modification programs, which both are staff secure and in hardware secure. The difference being hardware secure means there's a fence around the complex. Let's just be realistic. That's what it is. Okay. We can use foster care. We don't use that as much, quite honestly. We do have the access to do it. So that's kind of like some of our decision making. Once a youth is in placement, we continue to work with the youth. When the moment we staffed a case for placement, we are also starting to think about reentry and reunification. We are working with the programs to develop treatment service plans, to identify the youth's needs, to work with the facilities to make sure that they're addressing concerns. We have constant contact with the family while the youth's in placement. We've gone as far as we have our own ability to what we call Polycom, which allows them to do video conferencing with the kids, because a lot of times some of our placements aren't close. So the families can't get out as much as they'd like. Well, at least they can have a personal time talking with someone and being able to see their youth, their child. But like I said, we talk about reentry right out of the gate. We again, whenever the youth's getting close to coming home, we staff again. We look at what type of services we want to have implemented, and we try to have those services implemented at the moment they're discharged. Sometimes we actually have people going ahead of time and starting to meet with the family, and maybe even met with the youth, and get connected with those type of services. Okay. An important note is, anytime you hear we talk about staffing and for resources, we include the parents. We are always reaching out to the parents and have them participate in that. Because yes, we have an idea of what a youth may need, and we may be able to make a referral, but the family also would have an idea. And we feel it's important they have a voice in that meeting. And they often, will participate. We've really worked really hard as one of our roles to try to get to that point. There is another avenue that happens with kids that come into detention or come into the system. That's through emergency detention. These are youth who are arrested maybe for a very, very serious crime or maybe don't have a parent or guardian they can be released to. We do what we call a detention risk instrument. That gives us a guide as to whether or not you should be released back to the parent or guardian, detained, or maybe a detention alternative like shelter or community detention, something like that. If a youth gets detained overnight or gets a detention alternative, we bring that case into court the next business day for an emergency hearing. It goes before a judge, and we make a decision or a recommendation. Once that happens, if a youth remains detained, they're usually held at Noyes, but they may be held at some other facilities depending on our current population. So we have detention facilities throughout the state that we could put them at. They may be held in the shelter. We actually have a shelter here in Montgomery County at Kemp Mill as an alternative, or they may be placed on community detention, as I said, pending their adjudication. And during that time, again, our department begins to work the process. I will tell you that prior to DJS getting involved, Montgomery County Police does have a diversion program. I think that, when you were talking earlier about some of the resources, I don't think you'll find too many people that would disagree with what you were mentioning about the sooner we can get in and identify the needs, the better chance we have of keeping people from getting into our system altogether. And that includes coming to DJS, okay? Because once they start to accumulate that record, especially the younger they are, the further they're going to end up in our system. In addition, when you start having other people involved that have different roles, so you can have someone who has some family issues, some mental health issues, maybe picks up some charges, ends up in court. If they're not compliant, we bang our heads. We're trying to get them all the resources, get them all the sanctions, whatever we need to get them to comply. But if they don't, they end up getting deeper and deeper and deeper into our system. And the further in they get, the harder it is for them to get out. And, so I would totally support looking at some of those, front end, so to speak, options. Because I do see an increase of youth with mental health diagnosis. I think part of the reason we're seeing an increase is we're now really identifying them more. I think they probably always have been there, but we didn't really do a lot of the identification early on. So something like that I think would be very beneficial. I think that, when Judge Smith talked about having a one-stop shop, we kind of have a little bit of that. I think we tried to create that about 20 years ago when we created the Juvenile Assessment Center. In that we have our agency, we have DHHS, both child welfare as well as with SASCA and the mental health team that's there. So we actually have a little bit of a pool there, but it's not obviously, I think, what everyone's talking about, that people come in and this is the help you're going to get.
Very good.
I think I might have addressed everything. I don't, the map's a little blurry for me to see, so I tried to go through it the best way I could. So those are some of our decision points. I'll be more than welcome to answer any questions.
Thank you very much for being here, and I know Councilmember Rice has something to ask.
Well, thank you very much. So I'm very curious as to whether DGS currently refers individuals to, we have our Youth Opportunity Center here in the county or other county-run programs versus some of the other programs that you mentioned. So I'd heard some of the other ones that I'm not familiar with. I guess they're state-run programs, or
Right, they're ones we have contracts with.
Right, but what about for local?
A lot of times what will happen is we'll have families come in at intake. Maybe a parent will come in, and I think you're about ready to hear regarding the child in need of supervision.
Right.
A lot of times those are parents who come in, they have no idea what they want to do. So they'll meet with our intake staff. And a lot of times our intake staff will give them that type of information. The ones that are kind of under us, once they're either through the pre-court or through adjudication, we're going to probably want to provide our services as much as possible. But upon their release, we often will try to look and see if there's other services that they need and connect them.
So that actually was my next question, was that do you then reach out to organizations like Street Outreach Network, Family Services, others that are here in the county who are doing this work locally, who have the connections and the understanding of what's available here locally and are tied into the community? Do you reach out to them upon release of the individuals, or is it a case-by-case kind of basis?
It's case by case. We've worked with Mr. Cardona in the Street Outreach Network before.
Okay.
We've worked with other various county organizations. I think actually recently, last month, we had a resource fair right at the cafeteria here where we invited a lot of the community vendors that DGS kind of ran to do it. I think we got some positive feedback from that, where we had a lot of community vendors come and be available. It was our first attempt at it because we're trying to get more engaged with the community resources that we have. So, that's something that we share. If there's any additional programming or services you feel be appropriate, be more than willing to take a look and try to reach out to them. Absolutely.
No, and I appreciate that, Mr. Duncan. And look, the reality is that we're doing well, but we need to be doing a lot better. And so from that perspective, what we're currently doing isn't working. When you look at the recidivism rates, when you look at the reentry rates that are happening, it's not giving us what we need. So we're going to have to shake the system up a bit. And so it's not to say that you're not trying. It's just to say that we've got to change things up a bit, change the mix. And so I do think that having that tie-in, what we were talking about with the courts and with Judge Smith in terms of making sure that those resources are automatically there for every person. And just like you said, when a parent comes in and they're kind of like, well, I don't know, and throws their hands up, I don't know what's right. Well, of course not, because they don't know. I mean, just as you heard from Judge Smith, who I know is incredibly well connected and learned a couple things today about what's here in the community. That's the challenge that we face as a county. We have so many programs and so many people have no idea what's out there, right? And so being able to provide all of that information to the parents of the children, to the children themselves, so that they can get involved and engaged, and connecting them, I think is the next step for us. That's just the first step of many in terms of creating what Councilmember Hucker's talking about, which is this hub model. But on top of that, we really do need to build that connectivity. So I would encourage you to build those relationships with Street Outreach Network, with other entities that are there, and automatically contact them regardless of whether folks are asking for it or not. And I'll tell a story a little bit later. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, about why that's important.
Thank you very much. And I did want to mention that the State's Attorney John McCarthy has joined us. Welcome, and thank you for being here. Next, we're going to hear from Councilmember Albornoz.
Thank you very much, Mr. Duncan, for your work. We've had the chance to cross paths before, and I've always been really impressed by the dedication of you and your staff. Could you just talk briefly about what, if any, connection there is with Workforce Montgomery or workforce development programs in general?
Well, Workforce Montgomery, we've actually invited them to many of our staff meetings to come and give presentations. I think at one point we had some limitations because I think it was mostly down county. So it kind of eliminates a lot of our workers' availability. So we do try to keep them engaged. And when we have what I call all staff meetings, where all my staff come together, we invite various people from different organizations that we don't normally work with to it so that our people get familiar with it. And, unfortunately for us, I think one of the downsides I think you heard earlier was talking about some of our workers maybe not having the experience or knowledge. Part of that is being in Montgomery County, but being a state agency, we have constant turnover. We have a very young staff, very dedicated, hardworking, mean well, but, training. And then, if you bring a group in, and they spoke 2 years ago, half of their staff may not be there 2 years later, so they wouldn't know about that program. So we have to we're constantly re-inviting all these type of programs, and WorkSource is one of them we have. We've done it with that, and we did it with the Conservation Corps and some of those other type of programs where we invite them in to speak to our staff.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Glass, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to make a brief observation that, you know, a picture's worth 1,000 words, and looking at this process flow chart, just for your department shows how complex this issue is just within you, within your organization. And I just want to express my thanks to the committee chairs for organizing this first of many conversations so that we can try to untangle some of this, possibly reorganize some of this to make it work better for everyone, especially the youth that whose lives we're trying to improve. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
If I may add, I forgot.
Yes.
One thing. Youth that are detained pending final disposition, and we're looking for placement. We also do what we call a MASS. It's where we get psychological, psychosocial, get substance assessment, and we actually do the staffing at the facility with the parent and the youth to look at the program. So we do have some evaluation. I just wanted to point that out. I forgot to mention that.
And
As you said, there's a lot of stuff.
Yes,
I
please.
just wanted to point to one thing, because I think you're hitting really well on like having the right program for the right time. And sometimes we latch on to existing programs thinking that they're what we need. So I know, for example, like the reporting center, over the years, some of you have heard people requesting like a reporting center or use the reporting center more. And this is where I think the discussion with DJS is so important, because they have people on the total continuum. So something that's really set up for as an alternative to detention or for people who've already violated probation isn't the right place necessarily to put somebody who's in the beginning of an informal process that you really want to divert. And so I think sometimes, I know, Mr. Duncan, you know, you all get requests, could this person go to this program? And it's hard to, you know, you need to have the right fit. And so whether adjusting some of our county programs, like you talk about the Youth Opportunity Center or some of those places that might be more appropriate for the youth who can really be diverted, you know, or handled through the informal process, never get to court, is something that I think is a partnership, because sometimes I think there's pressure to use programs that really don't fit exactly where the youth is in the system. So I just didn't know if you wanted to make a comment at all.
And I think that's extremely important. And it's also important to keep in mind that we have to have places where, before they're court involved, that a youth wants to go to, that it's some place that they feel comfortable, whether, you know, we just call them rec centers, but whatever they are, so that they can be with friends and get in with an element that keeps them safe and sound.
No, and I think it's an excellent point. Obviously, you know, that's why I think from our department's point of view, we actually recently begun over the last year and a half to start to try to focus on the front end. You know, because obviously everyone looks at the back end, like the kids that are already adjudicated, the kids that are disposition. But our department actually is now starting to do more of a primary focus to try to get more of those resources that you're talking about through our intake, through our informal or pre-court supervision that I talked about. And, you know, so that's something that we are, as an agency, we are recognizing and saying if we can get that there, then hopefully that'll slow the progress of the ones that end up going to court. But I do think that, you know, there are times where we try to one-size-fits-all type of programming, and that's just not the case. And you know, whether it be for diversion or probation or for even for placements, each case is unique, as everyone's well aware, and should be identified and connected accordingly. So I do think that that would be something that is frustrating to people because it's not there on the front end as much, but I think definitely something that would be helpful greatly for that point.
Thank you very much. The next panel that or the next group, is from Elijah Wheeler, is going to bring his information up from the Collaboration Council. And I don't know if anyone else is going to be joining you. If others are, please come forward now.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Chairpersons Katz and Albernos, members of the committee. Apologize in advance. Allergies have gotten the better of my voice this past week.
I was going to say, I'll see you one and raise you. I mean, I have that same issue, so yeah, not a problem.
So I want to be as succinct as possible this morning, considering
appreciate
the fact
that.
that there are so many people who are speaking here. All too often, a contributing factor to contact with the juvenile justice system is an unmet need for behavioral health treatment and services. Yet a youth's involvement in the justice system reduces the likelihood that the youth will have access to appropriate community-based programs and with demonstrated effectiveness for reducing delinquency, symptoms of mental illness, and substance use. National studies indicate that up to 70% of juvenile justice-involved youth have at least one diagnosable mental health need, and up to 25% have a serious emotional issue. Most youth with mental health problems involved with the juvenile justice system can be safely and effectively treated in appropriate community settings. The prevalence of mental illness and substance use disorders, also known as behavioral health disorders among youth involved in the juvenile justice system, is staggering. Further complicating matters, some youth actually meet criteria for more than 2 diagnoses. From January to June of 2018 alone, 153 youth were screened by a child psychiatrist at Noyes for psychiatric evaluations. In addition to these data points, youth of color overwhelmingly make up a majority of youth who come into contact with the juvenile justice system. This is not because of differing behaviors from their white peers, but primarily because of poor decision-making policies that appear to be race-neutral in their face and the perception that effective community-based alternatives and deterrents to youth behavior aren't available or cannot be created. Beginning in 2004, the Models for Change initiative, funded by the Catherine MacArthur Foundation, began to spend an upwards of $100 million over the course of a decade in a multi-state initiative working to guide and accelerate advances to make juvenile justice systems more fair, effective, rational, and developmentally appropriate. Maryland, and specifically in Montgomery County, joined the Disproportionate Minority Contact Action Network and started learning and sharing practices and information to reduce racial disparities in the juvenile justice system. Over the course of our tenure as partners in the network, I had the opportunity to meet with and collaborate with peers from across the nation who are working on designing and creating best practice standards to address diverting youth, especially those with mental health diagnoses, from the juvenile justice system. A couple of examples of best practices that can take place on the front end that Frank just talked about a few minutes ago look like this. The designation of a community-based licensed clinical social worker who can carry out an assessment such as a CAFAS, which is a child and adolescent functional assessment scale that can capture any issues linked to mental health and or emotional dysregulation. The reason for there being a community-based social worker was binary. First, to make families feel safe who might have doubts about engaging with a government entity. And secondly, to ensure that families were being served by an objective third party who would make appropriate referrals to other diversion partners based on their unique understanding of the community that they served. Secondly, ensuring that there's an adequate trauma and ACEs screening for youth. Is there a history of adverse childhood experiences for a young person or other traumatic stressors? If so, how might these things play into a youth's behavior and what can we do to assist them? Youth who have ACEs are likelier to commit juvenile offenses, suffer from learning difficulties, and are at increased risk of suicidality. Lastly, the provision of case management services for youth and their families. In many instances, families are in need of guidance and service professionalism and someone who can walk them through the necessary steps to access care and support for their child. An introduction to low-cost or no-cost services or to social services for families experiencing job loss, food insecurities, and other issues. All these things play into a youth's behavior and have an effect on how they cope with and interact with others. We cannot expect to heal a child and return them to a wounded family ecology with the expectation that they'll just be fine. The most effective interventions with the greatest outcomes for youth are those that view family members as partners and effective collaborators. Racial and ethnic disparities in youth dealing with mental health symptoms being processed into our juvenile justice system will stop when system stakeholders responsibly collect data, use standardized tools to guide their decision-making, and regularly analyze that data that they collect to assess the performance of their efforts. Stakeholders at all levels must be accountable to that data. Lastly, we must finally acknowledge that the racial disparities that our youth face are not the result of the decisions that they make or their families make, but a result of the decisions made by those in positions of decision-making authority. Between his freshman and senior year of high school, my son lost 2 peers to suicide. Our youth are asking for our help, not for our harsh words or punitive measures.
Thank you very much. Okay. Thank you. We're going to ask the next group panel, Dr. Raymond Crowell. Thank you all. Thank you. Regina Morales. Dr. Crowell is the director of Department of Health and Human Services. Regina Morales is the manager of Child and Adolescent Behavioral Health Services. Nathaniel Park, who's the treatment section manager from Child Welfare Services, and Luis Cardona, who's the administrator of the Positive Youth Development. If you could please join us. Thank you all for being with us, as always. And Dr. Crowell, would you like to lead this off, please?
Sure. Good morning. My name is Dr. Raymond Kroll. I'm the chief. No, I'm not the chief.
Yeah, could you change the pronunciation? It would be so much easier on me. It really would be.
Health and Human Services.
Yeah. Thank you.
Still getting used to it. But
Yeah, okay, I hear you.
and I will tell you that I am delighted to hear this conversation, to have this conversation. I think this is in many ways long overdue for us. I've got a full group of folks to talk with you today about a lot of things that Health and Human Services does, and I'm torn between wanting to talk with you about my reactions to what I've heard thus far, and there are a lot of them, and waiting to let you hear from my staff here about the programs that we do at Health and Human Services that both address and have the potential to address some of the things, many of the things that we've heard today, or some of the things, but not all of them, certainly. I wanted to say two things, comments that I will make. One of them is that on Monday we had a press conference where we talked about racial equity and social justice, and it seems to me that this is an area that is ripe for addressing many of those issues that we heard and talked about at the top of the week. So I'm happy to be a part of that conversation. The other thing is that before we decide on what the tool is, we need to be thinking about and being clear about the scope and the scale of the problem and what's here that we have in place already. One of the things I think, we talk about a juvenile docket, and one of the things that I'm looking forward to is this chance to go down to D.C. and understand not the docket itself, but what's available and provided through the docket. Because a lot of those things, some of those things I would lay odds are available here in Montgomery County, but we haven't done the job of understanding them and integrating them and trying to figure out how we coordinate across those systems. I think a docket, when we think on the adult side, we use something called the sequential intercept model as a way of thinking about where and how to bring services into to the adult, human services to the adult services system. From deflection from the justice system so that folks never get in the door to reentry on the back end of that system is part of how we think about the adult side. And I think we have not done that well, and maybe not at all, for our children, for juveniles and families. And that may be the place that we need to look and see what we have as deflection points and what else we need to create. So a docket may be a part of that answer. It's only a part of that answer, I think. That said, I think I want to talk a little bit about where we are in HHS on services and what we work on, where we touch the lives of children, both in terms of prevention and early intervention and in treatment and recovery. We are collaborating and partnering with the schools, with our foster care and behavioral health systems, do a fair amount of work. Our outreach programs do that. We're also tied into the justice system in some ways. I think the first thing I wanted to show you is, and talk a little bit, is where we're engaged in the schools, because for a lot, it's 160,000 children in the schools. That's an obvious place to do some coordination and connection. The school system, just as an aside, has launched an equity initiative that I think is going to yield some promising results in going forward. So I'm looking forward to that piece. But we do a fair amount of work. We are in, and this graphic is just a quick display of where we are in elementary schools, middle schools is the next one, and high schools. And you can see we do a lot of work, both in terms of linkages to learning programs and in school and community-based youth services and child and adolescent behavioral health services. Many of my service areas, children, youth, and families, and behavioral health, most notably, are actively engaged in our child and adolescent mental health services, and our crisis center are actively engaged with the schools on a regular basis to try to serve the needs of our children. Linkages represents a place where we have steady involvement. Our child and adolescent mental health services, we have periodic involvement, regular involvement in some schools, but periodic involvement in the aftermath of suicides, or we're trying to do prevention work or trying to educate the community. And I think, and Crisis Center on Emergencies for Children. This past year, we topped 2,000 in terms of the numbers of referrals that came from the school system to the Crisis Center for follow-up for work. The challenge for us is that 2,000 represents the tip of the iceberg in terms of the numbers of children that are in the schools that are in distress, and it speaks volumes about the needs of our children that need to get addressed. So High schools are similar. We do a fair amount of work. We have programs that you'll hear about that talk about that work on suicide prevention and substance abuse prevention. So I won't belabor that. I want to turn this. Nate, are you doing
Yes, sir.
transitional trauma therapy?
Yes, sir.
So I'm going to turn this over to Nate, to my team, and I'll let them introduce themselves and in turn talk to you about the pieces that we do in HHS.
Very good. Thank you for being here.
Good morning. I'm Nathaniel Parks. Everybody calls me Nate at the department. I am excited to be here today to talk about some services that Child Welfare Services provides to families and children that we have the opportunity to work with to avoid placement in foster care, to provide support services and interventions to those families in the form of substance abuse referrals to the needed services, as well as collaboration that we have with the Department of Juvenile Services to address issues of when children come involved with Child Welfare Services as well as DJS. The first program I want to discuss is the Transitional Trauma Therapy Program. That's a therapy in which we identify when children are removed from the home of origin. A therapist gets involved immediately to provide support services because what we understand is the last thing we as a department want to do is remove a child from his or her home. And the trauma that's induced from just the removal, they have experienced episodes of abuse and neglect, and that's the only way that any of the programs that I'm talking about today are available to families in the community is if they've been identified with an episode or incident of abuse and neglect. The transitional trauma therapy approach we've assigned 2 licensed psychology person and a social worker to address when children are removed. They get involved. They provide some intense therapy to that particular child as well as the foster family, because what we realize is that when the child is removed and placed into a foster home, the foster parent oftentimes is at wit's end, very supportive. They've opened their hearts and their homes, but they don't know this child, and the child has just experienced a significant episode of trauma in which they were removed from the family of origin. Let's think about it. They've lost their family, they've lost their connections, they lost the home, they lost the bed that they sleep in. And the transition, the bridge, as I would call it, from removal from a biological or family of origins home to a foster home is that trauma therapist as well as the team. The team is very important, and the team is a social worker and that trauma therapist as well as a supervisor and manager who oversees that work. Our trauma therapy has been very successful in helping bridge the removal process because it's the continuum of care and services that we provide from assessment through the out-of-home foster care placement. We provide services for all children. Unfortunately, not all of our children are placed in the county, so any child placed in Montgomery County has the luxury of being involved with our trauma therapist team, which is really effective in addressing the issues which now are going to impact that child for a lifetime. One of the other things that our trauma therapist team does that's really important is make the referral. So our trauma therapy team has a maximum of 5 sessions because we really understand that this is an on-the-ground type work approach, that we really need to have them really flexible, available when we do removals, and some points in time we can do more than 1 removal in a day, so that trauma therapist is available to make that move. Can we go back a slide? Some of our numbers, for our traditional trauma therapy over the years. We began our trauma therapist intervention in 2017, in September 2017. And at that point, you can see we had really a lot of referrals. We had a good representation of not only the referrals, but the intervention of the trauma therapist. As we moved through from FY18 to FY19, we continued as a full year of implementation in FY18. And at that point, we had 2 staffers which were doing the trauma therapy. As we move into 2019, we lost 1 staffer. So that's where you see the difference in the numbers of families and children referred as opposed to those that were actually provided services. And for FY20, you see that at this point in time, we have been able to provide services for 10 children. However, we do have a referral waiting list for the other 21 children. As we work, as the trauma therapist works with the social worker and the team that's involved, we are also looking to identify long-term therapy. because we understand that trauma therapist is just a bridge, as I talked about, a short-term intense service that's provided to those children and families, foster families specifically. But we understand that the case may go on for a period of time, and that next step is going to be ongoing family therapy. The transitional trauma therapy, again, is a maximum of 5 sessions. The average number of sessions is 3.5. So we're able to work and meet the child's needs based on their transition and the efficiency of referring them to the next service prevention. Next slide is our substance abuse counselor. That's a person that's embedded in child welfare services that provides substance abuse intervention, referral, and counseling to parents who have been identified on the substance use disorder continuum. So the substance abuse counselor provides intense services and handholds, walks the parent through treatment and recovery. It's important for us for the substance abuse counselor to be at that first meeting when we begin working with a family, because that's the ability to make the connection, to provide the services, to make the referrals, and the buy-in from a parent from a substance abuse counselor who has the knowledge and ability to speak the language of treatment, recovery, and make an assessment. And we do use 2 specific modalities to make the assessment. We use the ASAMS assessment tool and the SASE assessment tool. For the entire length of the program, which also started in September 2016, we've had exactly 190 families serviced by our substance abuse interventionists. And what's impactful, next slide, is that for that 190 parents, we have serviced over 455 children, and only 17 have come into care. And that's really what we tout as far as interventive services and showing that children don't come into care. Some of the, next slide, would you? Some of the substances that our substance abuse intervention team sees when they engage with families, again, alcohol continues to be a significant problem in the county. But if you look at the opioids, and we know we're all concerned about the opioid crisis in the state and in the country, the number of families involved with opioids and identified as using opioids and needing treatment for opioids increased in that second year of our involvement. And we continue to see that increase. So as we now work with those families to make the referral, we assure that the services are provided, the intervention is implemented so that they can become better parents to provide services for their children. The substance abuse interventionist collaborates with the social worker to provide those support services and really focuses on the needs of the parents' substance abuse intervention. We'll move on to our crossover youth practice model. Our crossover youth practice model is exactly as I've described it. It's a practice model, it's not a program. And this practice model is only available for children that's involved with child welfare services via the Center, Child in Need of Assistance Finding, or in-home services. And the reason I want to differentiate is because not only do we do our assessments and we have foster care, but we have a middle point of in-home services where we really try to keep families intact, keep families together. And our intervention has been very successful in avoiding children from coming into foster care. So our crossover youth practice model was developed in concert with Georgetown University, McCourt School of Public Policy and Juvenile Justice Reform to enhance the practices to meet the high needs of youth involved with both child welfare services and DJS services. Our crossover youth model is only available for children involved with child welfare services. And the way it's effectuated is that on every week we get a new list from DJS of kids that have had DJS contact, and we cross-reference the list to see if any children that are involved with child welfare are also on that list. We begin to plan collaboratively for case management and support services to assure that, as Mr. Duncan talked about, children don't go deeper into the system, because that's what we really want to avoid, is those children going deeper into the system. Some of the collaborative approaches include joint visitation with DJS and child welfare services, DJS attendance at meetings to assure that we are planning for the family. We call those meetings family involvement meetings. We assure that child welfare also works with DJS to monitor the placements that we often have to place children. So that's important, again, to assure that we're connecting children and families together. Child welfare's main initiative is for permanency and seeking permanency for children and families that are involved. We always want our families to reunify and come back together. And if that's not possible, we will look for other permanent resources. Some numbers from our crossover youth practice model include, when our first year of operations, FY17, we had 13 youth service. FY18, we had 18 youth service, and currently, as of FY19, we have 15 youth service. There are some limitations to the crossover youth practice model, And those include there's not designated funding. There is not designated funding. Again, this is a practice model of collaboration between DJS and Child Welfare Services. And there's no direct case management services. It's the commitment of Child Welfare Services as well as the commitment of the DJS staff to assure that we collaborate, communicate to address the issues of children involved in both systems, thus the name Crossover Youth Practice Model. And next slide. Opportunities, and really want to talk about opportunities. Families First Prevention Act is going to be initiated in October 1st from the federal government, and we are excited. Families First and Prevention Services Act has no attached funding, so we are concerned, but we will make it work. Families First Prevention Services looks to assist families to maintain kids in their home of origin, to prevent foster care, to increase mental health services for families and children in the community, as well as parenting services. And we are looking for direction from our state agency as how we implement it. But we will begin now to work more diligently as we have with preventing kids from coming into foster care. And that really is our important work that we do in collaboration with our stakeholders and partners.
So our next piece of this is our department with our partnership with the Department of Correction and Rehabilitation, and I'm going to ask Luis Cardona to speak to those issues for us.
Thank you. Welcome, Luis. Thank you.
Yes, good morning. For the record, my name is Luis Cardona, the administrator for the HHS Positive Youth Development Program. Just echoing the powerful words and testimony of Judge Carlos Smith in terms of what she stated, and even some of the conversations that I've had with Elijah Wheeler over the years about the concerning disproportionate amount of young African-American males that we see at higher levels being tried as adults. And so about 2 years ago, Carolyn Davis, who oversees the Youth Offender Program, reached out to us and just took note of the fact that they were seeing an increase of gang-involved youth coming through the program, which led to us basically coming in there into Clarksburg and running a series of psychoeducational groups. Very interesting because, not to my surprise, one of the most consistent patterns that we heard and we continue to hear from these young men, and as young as 15 to age 20, 90% of them express a disconnection or absence of the father in their life. And of those participants, 80% of those are African-American youth, again, between the ages of 15 and 20. And of this group, 20% of these are young fathers or expectant fathers. And one of the things, bless you, one of the things that I remember in those discussions was, and continues to be, this dialogue with them where they're constantly saying, I've got to get out, I got to make sure I don't get in trouble again, but I got to get out and make money to take care of my child. And I'm like, no, you got to get out so you can be present in their life, right? But one of the most heartbreaking things that we've seen through our service is that often when you talk to these young men, you hear things like, man, I'm getting out in 4 months and I'm going to see my daughter for the first time, and I don't even know how I'm going to play with her because no one ever taught me how to play with my own child, right? And so I know Nate and I have had conversations on what that means and where we should be directing a lot of our efforts, you know. But again, you know, in the next slide, our group interventions focus on the following areas: helping these young men to reclaim their sacredness, because they're sacred. They made their mistakes, and you know they're paying their dues, but they're still sacred, right? And then building their capacity to break the cycle of incarceration within their families, because almost all of them tell me, well, my father was incarcerated, my grandfather was incarcerated. And so how do we help break that cycle and then help them to begin to heal from that missing father wound? To date, over 350 of these young men have participated in our program and continue to do so. As a matter of fact, as a result of this continuous need to address this missing father wound, we've decided to do a pilot with Imagination Stage, which starts next month, using the arts and allowing them to use that as a tool for healing, to tell their story, with the intent being that they can begin their own healing. It's not therapy per se, but the intent is to give them that space to process what they're experiencing. I will tell you, out of those 350 individuals that participated, as far as we know, only 3 have reoffended. Now, here's the catch, though. In all fairness, that's not because of us. That's because of the great work that the Department of Corrections Reentry Case Management Program is doing under the leadership of Kendra, who's just does amazing work. And whenever they need us, they just reach out to us and say, hey, look, this young man is falling into the same old patterns, and we work with them. I did want to add, although not included in this presentation, that our wellness centers, all of our wellness centers, including our youth opportunity centers, do provide reentry supports for all youth and their families. So not just for the youth, but even when they have situations where their parents have been incarcerated and they're coming back home. I do want to end it basically by acknowledging the fact that all my policy and practice decisions always run through this sister right next to me. Because I'm not a behavioral health expert by any means, but I always lean on her to help guide me in the decision making. So these are not decisions that I just make, but we make, in true partnership in the best interest of providing the best, most comprehensive services to our constituencies. Thank you.
Well, and first of all, thank you very much for all that you do for all of us, as everyone else as well. But how many are you seeing for the gang involvement? Are you seeing the percentages higher, lower? What are we seeing now?
So it's interesting because while we see many gang members that participate in the program, they're not incarcerated because they're gang members. They're incarcerated because they've committed some robberies, some very serious crimes. They've been tried as adults. Many of those crimes that they've committed are attributed to addressing a financial or economic need. Doesn't make it right, but it's a constant conversation that we're having, and we do ask them, well, did you have a job? And we kind of hear the same old that we normally get from many of the clients that we work with, that just finding a job in Montgomery County has been quite a struggle for them in general, and really drives their decision making.
Okay, thank you.
So Luis Cardona just did a nice introduction to Regina Morales, who's the chief, our behavioral health, child and adolescent mental health services. So.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you, members of the council, for this opportunity to speak with you about our services. I'm Regina Morales. I'm the manager of Child and Adolescent Behavioral Health Services. And I'd like to speak to you about screening and assessment services for children and adolescents, our SASCA program. SASCA is our one-stop entry point for parents and concerned adults to know whether their children have a mental health or substance abuse problem, and to make a plan to tackle it. It's a program designed to respond to the youth's needs at whatever stage they are, whether he or she is starting to show signs of a problem or has received a police citation for behavior or substance use. So what does SASCA do? We conduct a mental health and substance use assessment with both the child and the family. We listen to the family's concerns, and we ask about every aspect of the child's functioning in his home, school, and family, in order to make recommendations and to help the family develop a plan. And then SASCA helps the family link to services. You're looking at in this slide, you're looking at our SASCA referral sources for FY19. So these are the 8 entities that have made the referrals to our program. And you can see the distribution of referrals, where you see that we have a referral from FCD, that is Family Crimes Division, so that is the police department making referrals to our diversion program. And this would be an opportunity for youth to have a second chance before being referred to DJS. They are able to be part of the diversion program, complete recommendations, and have that in there. So that is SASCA as a component of the diversion program. But again, we receive referrals from multiple sources in the community. Any youth who is a resident of Montgomery County is eligible for SASCA services. So what makes up a SASCA screening? A SASCA evaluation includes both mental health symptoms, past and present, functioning in the home and school, substance use, including an on-site substance use quick cup test, And we use the CRAFT, which is an evidence-based substance use screening tool. And I'll speak to you a little bit about what is the CRAFT. So as you can see, the CRAFT is the most well-studied adolescent substance use screening tool available. It's efficient and effective among youths ages 12 to 21. It's valid for teens from diverse socioeconomic and racial ethnic backgrounds. And it's been shown to be a reliable and consistent measurement tool. So what you're looking at here is what happens as a result of this evaluation, of this conversation that the licensed clinical therapist has had with the child and family. These are the list of potential recommendations that could result from that. There could be, and this is the breakdown for FY19, 11% of families were referred, or their youth was referred for mental health only. 32% to substance abuse education. That could be either a 4-hour class or a 9-hour class, depending on the child's level of experimentation with substances. If the child is already on a path where there's a concern about addiction, they are referred to substance abuse treatment, and we have 15% of the youth in FY19 were referred for that. If there are both issues of substance abuse and mental health, they would be referred to both services, and that would be our 31% of youth screened referred to co-occurring treatment, so both mental health and substance use. And if the family comes in, and as a result of a nice conversation, we find out that everything is going well and that there is actually no real need for substance abuse, mental health, or any other type of recommendation, we wish them the best and we let them know that we're available if they need us in the future, but that is the end of that. That's no recommendation is made as a result of that. Now that doesn't mean that if during that conversation the family expresses concerns or needs that are not mental health or substance abuse, we will work with them, we'll talk to them, and we'll make referrals that are appropriate. So for example, since this is a screening that gives kids and parents the opportunity to discuss underlying issues, economic problems or housing problems may come up, and our clinician is able to give them referrals for that. If there are learning issues that are identified, if the family says he's really struggling in school, our clinicians often guide the parent as to who to contact in the school system in order to start a process of advocating for their child to receive services. That could be the school counselor, it could be the PPW. We have often make referrals when medical needs or food needs and other needs also come up. This year, we're excited to say that SASCA is teaming with school nurses. So you may be familiar with the fact that school nurses this year will begin using SBIRT, which is a substance use assessment, in the high school wellness centers. Nurses will then be making the...
Explain SBIRT.
Oh, so SBIRT is a very quick and easy screening that is able to be done, very short questions, where any professional can meet with a child or with an adult and kind of determine whether or not there's a need for further screening. And that's what the school nurses will be doing in the high school wellness centers. If they determine that there is a need for further screening, they will be contacting SASCA directly with the youth and making that connection to us so that we can connect with the child and family, bring them in, and apply in the next level of services, which is a more thorough assessment and referral to services. After making a referral to services, SASCA also case manages and makes sure that the family is able to connect to those services. And we do that at different levels depending on the level of need. For clients that are involved in the diversion program, we actually provide case management services until they complete recommendations. And I think that's probably been part of why we have such a high success rate with the diversion program. The next piece of information I'd like to share with you has to do with race and ethnicity breakdowns. This is a question that's come up, and so we would like to provide this information. The first pie chart that you're looking at refers to our overall SASCA breakdown for race and ethnicity. And the second pie chart refers specifically to the breakdown for youth referred to SASCA by the police as part of the diversion program. And let's see. This information is alluding to our race and ethnicity breakdowns for overall SASCA clients between FY16 and FY19. And again, the referral sources are varied. This includes all our referral sources, all our clients in SASCA. And the piece that I'm most excited to talk to you about is our outcomes. These are FY19 outcomes, but they're reflective of the past few years. In FY19, almost 1,000 youth and their families were touched by SASCA. And 85% of clients in the diversion program completed successfully. In addition to that, we have a 7% recidivism rate for those clients in diversion, which means that 93% of the youth that were successfully discharged were free of a new citation a year after the fact, a year after discharge. So we're extremely proud of that. Overall successful completion for SASCA, actually that will be you can see that here. So these are our completion rates by referral source. We have a total 71% successful completion rate. And as you can see, now it's broken down by the referral sources. 85% of clients referred in the diversion program completed successfully. And as we break it down, we can see where the referral sources, what their success rates are for child welfare services, for MCPS referrals, DJS referrals, and self-referrals. As we have been expanding our reach, I guess, for what we do, for our services, SASCA's gone beyond screening and referral services. We're now establishing community-wide programs and leveraging our resources with prevention and treatment. One of the programs that we're extremely proud of is Adolescent Substance Abuse Prevention Program, known as ASAP. This was a grant-funded program that we sought to fund this initiative. And it's been really picking up speed in terms of how many clients or youth we're serving in the schools every year. At this point in FY19, well, to explain the program, we have an addictions counselor who is wonderful with youth, and he provides coping skills groups in the schools and substance abuse prevention groups. It could be in the schools, it could be in the community. We've done this at rec centers. So basically whoever or whatever agency or whatever school would like this service, we're happy to serve. And in FY19, we provided these groups to 220 youth in 9 schools. And in addition, we also provide educational presentations on substance abuse and mental health out of the ASAP program. Another initiative that we've been very proud of in our prevention is the Be the One initiative, which hopefully you heard about. This was initially started as a website development by a young person who revamped our Be the One website. This was a graduating senior. So the Be the One campaign basically has been a youth-led effort, and we're very proud of that piece. It garnered recognition nationwide by the National Association of Counties. But more than that, we're proud of the fact that it's actually making a difference in the teen community. It's suicide and substance abuse prevention. And it's been inspiring the growth of youth-led prevention groups, such as Students Against Destructive Decisions, the SAD groups. And that's something we want to focus a lot of effort on this year is how can we increase SAD groups in various schools and really get youth taking leadership in positive development and mental health and substance abuse prevention. And lastly, I want to speak with you about our therapists in child and adolescent that are community-based, home-based therapists dedicated to services to the clients involved with juvenile services or with child welfare. So we have a group of 5 therapists that only receive referrals from either DJS or child welfare services and provide therapy in the community. So thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you.
And thank you. Councilmember Rice.
Well, I hate to hog the microphone, so I'm going to try and be quick about this. Just briefly, when you mentioned about Health and Human Services and nurses, It's one of the concerns that we've had when we held joint meetings between HHS and our Education and Culture Committee. We're asking our nurses to do more, but yet they're spread thin amongst schools. So I hope that as a part of, and I know that Mr. Tibbetts from County Executive Elridge's office was here earlier. I hope that as a part of the formalization of this budget for this upcoming year, that that's a part in terms of building up the number of nurses that we have within our schools so that they're not spread between multiple schools and still doing more work as we're talking about doing. I think that what you're doing is fantastic, and the work that they're doing is incredible. The reality is that they're overwhelmed, and we hear that from the nurses directly in our schools. And so just a statement there. On the budget piece as well, and Mr. Cardona, I'm going to put you on the spot, and I apologize. I'm going to put you on the spot in two tough questions. The first one's easier than the second. And I really just want to formalize this on the record. I have a feeling I know the answer. I've talked to your staff at multiple events. I was just at National Night Out and was talking to folks in our Germantown Park area, formerly Cinnamon Woods, where we've had a number of horrible crimes, including murder. There they've seen increased need in the community for their services and are spread thin. And so from that perspective, as we see it continue to grow, we just had the other murder that just happened on the other side of Germantown near the movie theater. So we continue to see a rise in terms of these things, and your staff are responding and being at all of these events. In fact, you went so far as to, in the last email transmission that I saw, identify that one of the relatives of the person who was murdered was actually also a relative of Trey Dawkins. And so from that perspective, a 12-year-old individual who's seen 2 murders in the course of less than 1 year and wanted to provide some wraparound services for them. Those are the kinds of things for the audience, and unfortunately, Councilmember Jawando's not here, but millions that are watching at home need to know. This is the kind of work that's going on in the community to prevent some of this from happening. Can you talk about your staffing models and how you're seeing increased need and what that means for you in terms of addressing that throughout the county, not just in Germantown?
So we're currently fully staffed in both the Street Outreach Network and the Safe Space program. And like I've said before, the more you staff, the more you identify the need. That's just the reality. One of the things that we did in the restructuring of PYD this year is that we have now set up geographical structures. So not to say that Germantown Park is a bad place, because it's a very thriving community, very community-oriented. Unfortunately, it's gone through some stuff like other parts of the county. And so we are being very specific, targeting that community to include not just what the Street Outreach Network does, but also what our Safe Space program has. So that each region, whether it be the Germantown community, whether it be the Montgomery Village, Gaithersburg community, the Wheaton, kind of what I call West Silver Spring community, and then the East County community, which includes Castle Boulevard and the White Oak area. So we have teams right now of 4 in each one of those to make sure that it's not just falling on just 1 or 2 of our staff. But again, I don't believe that we need more staff. I believe that we need to figure out how we, kind of as Raymond said earlier, how do we coalesce all this great work that's being done, especially to focus our efforts on community leadership, but on the families specifically.
Okay. Thank you. And then my last question for you, and I apologize for this, but there's been a lot of talk about community policing here in the county with the hiring of a police chief. For us, you and your organization deal with this directly when it comes to the youth and their interaction, kind of what we talked about before when we were talking about then being involved in the justice system. And so from your perspective, can you give me your thoughts from you on the ground in terms of what we do with community policing well versus what we need to do more of to ensure that there are less interactions that then result in those children being pushed into the justice system?
So I do have to acknowledge that the police department just did a great job of getting the right person in there to oversee community outreach. My colleague and our fellow HU Bison alum, Sonia Pruitt, who really truly understands what community policing models should look like. And I believe that's going to be a great asset for us moving forward. We have already met. We have talked about what the opportunities are, how we can support what they're trying to do in community policing. Clearly, our role is not that of police suppression, but the one thing I'm very happy to hear from Commander Pruitt is that her whole focus is on how do we start moving in the direction of a more prevention-oriented approach to what we're doing. The closest thing we have to that is a part of our Safe Space program, where we are now identifying and training members of those communities, like Germantown Park, like Southern Mill, in Community Sentinel training, where we're now giving ownership to the community to help strengthen their community safety efforts. Not all alone in isolation. We're there to support them, but for them to help, basically tell us, what do you need to accomplish community safety in your community.
Excellent. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Councilmember Glass.
Thank you for the deep dive on this. Mr. Cardona, during your presentation, you talked about breaking the cycle, and it was specifically related to the cycle of incarceration. But I want to augment that a little bit and ask about breaking the cycle of parental engagement or disengagement. Do we have any programs here in the county specifically towards young men and helping them be more engaged fathers?
I want to defer to Nate. You can talk a little bit about what you do.
Absolutely. At Child Welfare Services and Health and Human Services, we have a fatherhood program. So we do work with fathers who are involved with the department, as well as receiving referrals from other agencies in the county to provide support services in the form of an educational support class, as well as some limited case management that we provide for fathers who are involved with the county. HOC also has a fatherhood program, which we've collaborated with to provide services, support, intervention for those young fathers who really want to do better by their children. As we talk to dads throughout the county and throughout really the state, their hope and their goal is to improve the lives of their children. Some of the decisions that they have made maybe weren't the right ones, but they do realize that the ability to engage, to be a part of their child's life is really where they want to be and what's necessary. So we are providing some support services to dads in the county, and again, we collaborate with Housing Opportunities Commission to support fathers in the county.
So partnership with HOC, are there any other agencies, departments, MCPS, or anything else to help expand that?
Just HHS and HOC.
Okay, thank you.
And if I may add something to that, the work that I think you're referring to begins early on, and it's attachment-based healing that needs to happen between children and families. The work that Linkages does in the elementary schools, and as we, a lot of our private nonprofits and child and adolescent, we're focusing on healing that relationship between the parent and child so that they are able to parent when they're older, so.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you all for being here. Thank you. Did you have one other thing to?
Just a couple of comments, because I know your time is tight. And
we're getting tight. So go ahead. Okay, please.
Just a couple of things that overall, in terms of what I've heard this morning. One of them is this issue of a need for a, well, you talked about the process flow chart that you saw from juvenile services. Multiply that times every agency that we have that is involved with children, school system, us. The need to streamline that is one thing. The need to understand what's going on and how you access that and who are those people that access that are important. We need to do, I think, fuller assessments of what's going on in our children's lives. That includes family assessment. We've got multiple agencies doing that kind of assessment now. We need to figure out how we put those pieces together and communicate those pieces more effectively to each other and modify our assessments so that we're doing less redundancy of assessments and more comprehensive assessment across the board. The bigger issue, one of the big issues for us is navigation of supports across those complex systems, and within those systems, you all know that one of my commitments is to try to figure out how to do better navigation within HHS, but this just points to that need to do navigation across this system, and I think part of that is a group of folks who know how to navigate the systems and know who to contact to reach into those systems to get what we need for our children and families, and who are on top of that. Especially important as part of that navigation piece is family engagement and family support, because we do assessments on what's happening with the children's lives, but all too often, and we respond to that, but all too often we don't necessarily think about what else we need to do to support the families who are in turn supporting the children. I think there is a need for better coordination and integration and communication and service coordination across the systems, including our domestic violence programs. We do a lot of work with adults in domestic violence. And I know we do connections between our adults programs and our children's and juvenile programs, but I think there's more of that needs to be thought of and considered. The other one is that a lot of this is late stage. So earlier access to services before there's a need to engage with the police department, the juvenile service system, the courts, so that we're doing a little bit more. I think there's a way to identify, there are means to identify children who are showing some signs of risk or families who are at risk, and thinking about how do we deal with the children who have families that are being challenged. And then the last one, I think, is the last two, targeted services to address inequities, obviously, but also to focus on girls. We've heard that, but I think it needs a little bit more attention. And the fathers of the children that are struggling. You've heard a lot about, obviously, undergirding all of this is our questions about capacity and where there's capacity and where the capacity is not aligned with the need. So the first order of business for us is to, as Luis Cardona points out, is to align, to look at where we are, and are we using what we have to the best effect, and are we really integrating and accessing what we already have in place. That is not to say that I think that many of our human service systems and supported justice service systems have all the capacity they need. There is a need for shared desired outcomes. We track a lot of how much we do. We track a fair amount of outcomes that are specific to the programs or service areas that we serve in terms of recidivism, et cetera. But I think the question for me is what happens to the folks who don't recidivate? Not only do they not recidivate, but are their lives on track? And are we doing things with them that help them meet the demands that society's placed on them at any given age? That's a larger question that has to get answered collaboratively, I think. We're looking forward to the Families First Act, and it's been passed. The state hasn't pushed down how it's going to roll that out and share that funding at the local jurisdictions, but I think it's an opportunity for us to do some collaborative planning across these systems to figure out what we have and what we need and where the big gaps are and how we do a better job in our existing systems. So thank you for the time.
Thank you. And Councilmember Galbraith.
So it's difficult to process all this because obviously the complexities among the various systems, and I have sat intently and heard every single one of these presentations. A lot of this information I was generally familiar with based on my previous work focusing on positive youth development, but even somebody who's been in the system for 12 years now, it's constantly a moving target. And we talk about systems as these operational things, but these systems are made up of people who are doing their best to do this work. And oftentimes the best referral process or system is just relationships between the various agencies that are doing this work on the ground, and somebody may have happened to run into at a meeting or a conference, business card is, and there's a connection that's made. And so I recall 4 years ago that we actually held a summit of all of the various providers within the positive youth development space. State's Attorney's Office was there. We had representatives of the judicial branch. And while it was a productive session, the best part of it was just getting people to know each other. Yep. And as we heard from our representatives at the state level, there's a lot of turnover in this work because the burnout rate is so high. And so I do think that setting up, maybe it's every 18 months, probably not every year, but with some consistency that we can look forward to getting those folks together that are the most directly involved in this work so that there can be more collaboration and partnership and trust building that I think could help. It won't solve every problem, but it will help, I think, tighten the ship a little bit. So, yeah.
think that's a piece of the answer. PYD is a perfect example in some respects. PYD has a very narrow frame of focus in our system, and we can pull those folks together. But a lot of those folks also work on other elements of youth, other than gang involvement and gang reduction. There's a need to understand across that system and bring those folks together, not necessarily every 18 months, but maybe on a regular basis to look at our systems and to talk about where we need to grow. Is it PYD this year? Is it something on fatherhood this year? And how do those things link together? Collaboration Council has been one of those places. We did something similar at the local management board in Baltimore, the Family League, and brought folks together across the systems to talk about how do you talk to and integrate and coordinate a system and build the systems that have and fill out the gaps. If we bring people together in their silos, we will get expansion of silos and recommendations based on the silos versus looking at our whole system and figuring out where best and how we collectively support the needs of our children as they go from birth to adulthood.
I appreciate that, and I think it would also help with something that Elijah mentioned earlier, which is data collection, because no one agency has all the data points that are going to be necessary to help everyone. So I think that, we've made some great strides in that space, in the ability to share information between HHS and MCPS and vice versa. But more needs to be done, and that could be another benefit to convening groups like that is focusing a little bit more on data sharing. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you to the panel. But I do have to tell you, I think part of what we're doing, and today obviously is a long day, and it is a confusing topic, but it is an important topic, and I do think the one-stop shop model is becoming more and more obvious that we need to do something so that there's a coordination, because it's on an hourly basis. It's not just a daily basis. This is an hourly basis where you're having these issues. And to the point about having a gathering of people, my wife years ago did the school SCUP, the School Community United Partnership. She was one of the people that did that, and it was really for people, personnel workers, and others in the school system to really just know each other. They'd actually spoken to each other on the phone. They'd actually worked with each other. There's overlap. In some cases, you need redundancy, and you needed the overlap. But in many cases, they never even knew each other. They knew and they weren't 100% sure what each group was doing. And so once a year they do that. Maybe that should be something that we look into. I do think we need much more coordination, and everybody wants it. It's just how do you do it? And so that's where we are. Thank you all very, very much. We're going to move on to the next panel, and that's Carol Jones Pickney from Everymind. And whoever she would like to bring with her, please. Yeah, we got 2 minutes. Good morning and thank you.
Good morning. Thank you. I appreciate you having me here today. And my name is Carol Jones Pickney, and I'm therapeutic case manager for Everymind, which at the time when we started SINS was actually Mental Health Association, so we've rebranded. I'm going to talk about a little bit about what I did, but there's so many things that have been said here that are redundant, and I have a passion for this. I actually just came off of medical leave, so this is my second day back in the office. So bear with me. So when I was at DJS, I was assigned to be in the office. I received referrals for the SINS Child in Need of Supervision program, and I like to call it Child in Need of Support and Services, because that's basically kind of what it was. And so I would receive referrals from DJS, the schools, the community, self-referrals. A lot of times I get calls from, the crisis center. And part of the work was just pretty much hearing parents who, as we are overwhelmed, and they've tried so many different systems and things. And so a lot of it was, I spent a lot of time just on the phone talking for maybe an hour or so before I could even kind of do my assessment. So I would do an assessment. They would come in for intake, the parent and the youth. The youth had to be present with the parent at the time. I think one of the beauty of case management is when our kids, particularly in this, who have been in trouble, and early intervention is so important, is that they think they're coming to a place and they're going to be detained, or they hear therapy, and most of the kids that I work with don't want to hear therapy. So the beauty of it is that they have case management, and part of my job was to prepare them for therapy because some of them, they did need it. So that was some of the successes, being able to have that kind of guidance for the youth so that they see therapy is not something that they don't want to do, because a lot of them have had past experiences that didn't quite work and didn't understand. You know, a lot of times parents came in and they wanted their kids to be detained, boot camps and those kinds of things. It was a quick fix. But as you know, these things don't happen. Kids don't just wake up and these things have happened over time. So a lot of it was getting parents to understand that I can't express the importance of parent education. And as Judge Smith was saying, a lot of the parents have no knowledge about IEPs. Just the advocacy part is just overwhelming for them. So if it is for them, just imagine a youth coming in the door for figuring out what they want to do. Some of the things that I used to do would be coordinating with the services, but the importance was following up with those services. So I may have a youth that comes in, or parents come in, and we send them to various places, and sometimes it just doesn't work, or everybody's inundated with things to do. So one of my goals was to go back and see if that connection was made and what we can do further. So I think that was something that was positive. My youth, they like alternative things. They had a lot of anger, a lot of conflict. Some of the time things I would use, I would look at some of the agencies such as Dante's Boxing Gym. So it's not to box, but try to figure out conflict. So we were able to do that. And you got to kind of think outside of the box, because they'll sit there and tell you, I've been there, done it. And so so that was pretty good. It's unfortunate the program is not there anymore, and we need more of it. I still get calls about SENS programs and what's going on with it, and we do the best that we can. I think that's pretty. I don't want to talk about some of the same things that we need. Access. Sometimes my referrals, I'm on a wait list, and kids need the services right then. So you have some kids back when they come in to appointments, they're scheduled, they don't come back because they want services right then and there, and they can't get them. And so a lot of times, a lot of my youth were runaways. So you couldn't get them. You can't do anything with you can't. And the program was voluntary, so we have to remember it's not a mandated approach. So I appreciate your time.
No, and we appreciate yours. We appreciate your patience today, and we have a couple more panels. But this is a topic that it is going to be one that we have to visit many times and figure out what we need to be doing. So we thank you for all your help. Thank you. Next, we're going to ask Carlotta Woodward of the State's Attorney's Office, and Mary Siegfried of the Public Defender's Office, and Shelley Brown, who's a private practice attorney, to provide their comments and perspectives. And we appreciate all of your patience on this as well. This is a longer day, but this is an important one. Ms. Woodward, did you want to lead it off?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chairman Katz and Chairman Abernaz and council members who are present and allowing me to have the opportunity to speak today. I'm currently the chair of the Juvenile Division in the State's Attorney's Office here in Montgomery County, and I have been in this position for almost 2 years. I've been a prosecutor for about 7, and prior to that I was a defense attorney in the juvenile field, so I've been on both sides of the aisle. One of the things that, and I've listened to these panels speak about, is kind of what the State's Attorney's Office does with respect to trying to have children not be referred to the Department of Juvenile Services or not come into our office. And one of the things is the Teen Court Diversion Program, which I think this council is very familiar with for first-time offenders. And we also have the Truancy Prevention Program, which is current in 19 middle schools, and that's also re-engaging children in school and making sure that they have the necessary tools in hopes that we don't see them having contacts. I had an opportunity to speak with Judge Smith. I practice in front of her regularly in juvenile court, and we are talking about trying to have some sort of the truancy prevention program actually implemented in a probationary term or something of that nature in order to help in the re-engaging of these children, getting them the resources that they need on top of what Montgomery County Public Schools are doing is giving that additional help to have these children. I think Councilmember Glass talked about the extensive flow chart. It is extensive. It is something that I think Ms. Siegfried and I and Ms. Brown, we've worked together over 15 years for me. And it's understanding it. It's understanding the process and the time. It is important that for the council members to know, and I think the statistics are brought, is that, you know, by the time these children come to the state's attorney's office, they have potentially been offered diversion. They have potentially been resolved at intake at the Department of Juvenile Services or had pre-court supervision. So by the time we're seeing them in my office that I work at, typically you're talking about somebody who has had more than 3 contacts with the system. And it shows that 51% are authorized from the Department of Juvenile Services for us to determine if we're actually going to formally charge these children in court. And it also shows statistics that we actually decline 20% of those. So we're talking about 30% of those cases that are referred to us from the Department of Juvenile Services. And that's the only way that we actually have the option to be able to charge these children in court, is by getting authorization from the Department of Juvenile Services. And I think what we've talked about and heard today is about services. And I think we know, and studies show, that the age of onset is a great predictor as to whether we're going to see these children continually coming back in the system or going further into the system. I think that services on the front end is extremely important, and having services often. We see a lot of children or parents coming into the state's attorney's office wanting help, and their children are not in trouble, but they are out of control and they need help and they don't know where to go and they don't know where to receive these particular services. I think that the gaps in the system deal with services at the beginning, and also services that are provided once they are actually in the system. And that is providing services that are individualized to that child. Each child has a unique story, a unique family, and needs those specific services for them. You can't have a round peg in a square hole when you're dealing with juveniles. And it's also providing these services quickly and effectively. And it is very sad when you saw that the flow sheet of that, it is sometimes 120 to 180 days before these children are actually viable to receive services in the juvenile court. And once they are, it then can be another 4 weeks, 8 weeks before they're receiving services. So you have this extreme lapse in time. And although a lot of it is the statute, I think one of the things that is very important is the individualized services on the front end and on the back end to make sure that these children do not graduate to adult court and that they get everything that they need throughout the juvenile system.
Thank you. Ms. Siegfried.
Hi. Thank you for having us here today and for
You touch your mic. Is your mic on? There we go. There we go.
Judge Smith. There you go. I have listened to everything, and so I'm not going to repeat what's been said, but a lot of people in this room realize what the issues are. And there are a lot of problems with the juvenile system, you know, as a whole, and there's a lot of problems that the Department of Juvenile Services has, being a state agency. And I know that the council can't fix those. So I'm going to focus on the aspects that I think the council can do and things that can make changes for our youth. Because we do see now at the Public Defender's Office, by the time the kids come to us, they have whatever deferred programs that they have, deferments, they have not been successful in or have not been offered. And I echo what Judge Smith said, almost our entire population of our clients are black and brown children. And it should not be that way. So the 3 things that I see that the council can help do to help stop that from happening are, number 1, focus on our schools and the programs in the schools. Number 2, fund more programs. And number 3, help create a pathway from the Department of Juvenile Services or the juvenile justice system or even from the school, a pathway to career employment. And when I say focus on the schools, A lot of our clients come from, or that are in the juvenile system, come from school conflicts. And we can pretty much peg the schools that they're going to come from, those with more resources, that have smaller classrooms, that are in more affluent neighborhoods. We don't get a lot of referrals into the court system from those schools. It tends to be the schools in the lower counties where, with lower socioeconomic finances and parents that are working 2 and 3 jobs that may not have enough supervision. And maybe the schools are bigger, maybe there's a lot of bilingual students and the teachers are overwhelmed, maybe not as cultural sensitive as they could be, just because of the volume. For whatever reason, those kids tend to be referred to the criminal justice system or the juvenile justice system more often. And even though now they have like mediations in schools, which resolves a lot of the conflicts, we still see, even though the mediation has gone through, the kids have now shaken hands, now they're friends, but the case, or like it's a school fight, is still being referred to the Department of Juvenile Services, and it then filters its way, it comes through the courts, and it's been 6 months, past. All of this, we have a lot of kids that repeat over and over and over again the 9th grade, and it's no wonder they're disengaged. And I've had clients, the saddest thing that I've ever heard was, Ms. Siegfried, can you please just get me locked up so then I can get my GED? Because when they're locked up, they can get their GED, but when they're on the street, they have to go to school. And when they know that college is not in their program, and they just want to get the education so they can get a career and get a better job, it is nothing but frustration for them. So we have to figure that part out, people that want to get through. And along those lines, places, if you want to keep them in school, let them have more opportunities like the Thomas and Edison Center, where they're learning hands-on apprenticeships, hands-on tools, things that they can use and they can go out and make a living. And that goes right into my third point. If you could please create a better pathway for these kids, more things like work centers, where they not only have someone that can help them learn how to do an interview, but can help them get the right clothes for the interviews. Do you know people that are afraid to go to interview? Some of my clients, now we have clothes that we give them when they're my clients, but the goal is to keep them from being my client, right? So if you have a place where they can get a pair of slacks and a button-down shirt so they don't have to show up with blue jeans and a t-shirt that haven't been washed in 5 days because that's all they own, that's going to make a tremendous difference. And if you have more of these programs and more accessible, because these kids don't drive, they don't have their own trades, and a lot of times their parents are working just to make ends meet. If they have, guardians that are really even engaged, they have to do it all themselves, and give them the opportunity to do it.
Thank you. I go to the jail for the GED graduations, been there several times, and that's always been something that I've thought of as well, that when you go through the graduation ceremonies, and of course Montgomery College will give those young people a scholarship. And I've often thought, we'll give a scholarship for somebody who's here, but in order to get somebody not to be here, we need to be doing something different as well. And of course there are organizations like Wider Circle and many others that will help someone with clothing, but you have to have the transportation and whatnot to get them there. So we need to do a better job. Please, Ms. Brown.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to speak here today. My name is Shelley Brown. I am a private attorney here in Rockville. Excuse me, I think my allergies are bothering me as well. I've been practicing criminal and juvenile law for about 24 years, and juvenile law is a large focus of my practice. So all the people who've basically spoken today I've been working with for over 20 years. A lot of what Ms. Siegfried said I concur with, and she said a lot of what I wanted to say, but I did want to add that early intervention, as was previously said, is very important. And when I mention early intervention, I mean as early as grade school, kindergarten, and things like that. Because children that we represent and are seen in juvenile court have undiagnosed mental health issues, and if those mental health issues are diagnosed early intervention will help them for them not to end up in the juvenile justice system. it's clear to me through the work with my clients and my client's family, because doing juvenile law is very unique. It's very different than doing criminal law, because you're not only working with the client, you have to work with the family, because you can't get things done for the client because he's a child if you don't work with the family. And that's a challenge in itself. In addition, in juvenile court, as the judges previously stated, there's a rotation in juvenile court where they spend, I don't know if it's a year or two, I'm not sure, or 18 months in juvenile court. I would advocate that there be a assigned juvenile court judge, because that person would specialize in juvenile court, know the programs, know the process, and not someone coming in, and as soon as they learn, they're gone. And that's basically similar to in the state's attorney's office. We've been blessed to have Ms. Woodward in juvenile court in the state's attorney's office, because she's had experience as a defense attorney as well as a juvenile court prosecutor. But that's not always the situation, because they also bring people in and out, and once they learn the system, they leave. So I would, and that's something that you all can do, but I wanted to put that out there, that that's something I think that would improve the court. As well, in juvenile court, I do a lot of panel work for the Office of the Public Defenders. When there's a conflict, the Public Defender's Office has to pay private attorneys to represent juveniles, because they can't represent several individuals alleged to be involved in the same incident. In those cases, people come to court and have to come to court multiple times, and they become frustrated because they are not represented. And when they come to court, there isn't an avenue for them to obtain either a public defender right then in the courtroom right then. Because if you're charged as an adult, you go before a commissioner, and you're qualified for the public defender or not qualified right then. So you know that. So we have the child coming to court with their parent. They really don't understand the system, because there's been no attorney explaining it to them. The judge explains it to them, but they're children, they're not really understanding. The parents really may be uneducated to the system or otherwise, or English might be a second language, and they not really understand. Instead of being interviewed right there or getting the help they need right there, go across the street or come back with some different information. So that's something, part of the process I think is lacking. In reference to, I believe one of the council members asked a question about problem-solving courts or other courts across the state. I'm aware of some of the problem-solving courts in Prince George's County that do an excellent job. I know they have a juvenile drug court, which we did attempt to have a juvenile drug court here, but I believe it wasn't set up in a way in which it became interesting, or that our clients felt as though it was going to benefit them. They didn't have, I don't believe, a GED teacher. Ms. Siegfried mentioned that having GED or programs such as that is very important, because if our kids aren't educated, they're going to be in the criminal justice system next. As far as, I know the council spoke about the GED program at the detention center, and I know that there is a program at Montgomery College where Montgomery College is free if you make a certain amount of money. But in reality, the hoops that you have to jump through to get taxes. Some people's parents who are there, if they're making hourly wages or they're working under the table, their parents aren't going to have that information. So the people that we truly can be helping to get their two-year degree aren't going to be reached by having all those hoops to jump through. So I would ask for something to be done in reference to that, having it streamlined. If you can't get this information, if it'd be another way, if you can't get it through the front door, go through the window. And that's the way, as a defense attorney, that's the way we look at things, because that's what you have to do. In reference to another issue that was brought up was the school liaison to the court. I remember 20 years ago, there was a Mr. Norwood who worked for the schools. He was fabulous. His office was in the courthouse. I actually, the other day, didn't think we had one anymore, because I haven't seen a court liaison in many years, and I found out that the court liaison is also a PPW, so they split their time. That's why we don't see them. Right. We need someone who's in that courthouse every day to help our kids. These kids, if we don't want to see them back in the juvenile justice system, much less the criminal justice system, they need to be educated. They need to be educated. And I just wanted to backtrack to one thing I did say in reference to the early intervention and getting kids diagnosed early, and parents to be advised, taught, or however you want to look at it, to understand the system. Because if you are not educated from, I guess, a college, or you didn't graduate from high school, you may not be able to navigate the rules of MCPS. I mean, we're all lawyers, and we go through it. We do it every day. It's a little daunting, and obviously the parents they have a right to have an attorney, but do they even understand what that means? Do I need an attorney to help me get a 504 plan or an IEP with my child? Is that really realistic to think that some parents can afford that? So I believe that the school system or the county can assist parents in navigating the system. And a PPW, I understand, that's supposed to advocate for the child, but realistically, it's not to the extent that these kids need. Their assistance is not to the extent, because if kids are more likely to, they're more likely to get involved in the juvenile justice system if they're not going to school, if they're not feeling a part of the school, because they may have a learning disability, and then they stop going to school. I've had clients as young as 10 years old who decide, I'm not learning, they don't want me here because they're having issues, maybe ADHD or other challenges in school, and they decide, I'll just not go to school because I keep getting suspended, I keep getting put in the principal's office, and nobody's helping me. And mom and dad may not know how to help. So having some assistance early in the school, not once they get to be teenagers and they're in the system working with us. So I want to thank you again for giving me a moment to speak.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for being here. There's no questions at this moment, so we thank you. And the last panel that we're going to have, and by far from least, is Montgomery County Public Schools. And if they would like to, and I don't know who all is coming forward, but I do believe that, where are we on? Rochelle Rubin, who's the Associate Superintendent of the Office of Student and Family Support and Engagement, and Kevin Londas, who's the Associate Superintendent for Special Ed, and Tracy Foster, who's the Executive Director of the Office of the Chief Academic Officer. And if I missed anybody, please let me know. Could you introduce yourselves, please?
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity. Good morning, council members. My name is Rochelle Rubin. I'm the Associate Superintendent in the Office of Student and Family Support and Engagement.
Please.
Good morning. My name is Tracy Foster. I'm the Executive Director to the Chief Academic Officer.
Good morning. I'm Philip Lynch, the Director, Department of Special Education Services. I'm pinch hitting this morning for Mr. Lowndes. I'm the Associate Superintendent who unfortunately was not able to be here this morning.
Okay, thank you.
Good morning. Excuse me. Good morning. I'm Terrence Fisher. I'm the Court Liaison for Montgomery County Public Schools.
Very good. Thank you. And Ms. Rubens, please.
Good morning. So we thought it was really important to have Mr. Fisher present with us. We've kind of heard that reiterated throughout the presentations around the court liaison. I believe we were asked to specifically make comments in reference to that. So I want to begin by saying that, in Montgomery County Public Schools, there's nothing more important to us than the welfare and the well-being of each and every student. And I think our superintendent has started the mantra in our county, all means all. And so putting action to those words have been the center of our work in Montgomery County. And speaking to that, I'd just like to take us back a little bit to the Code of Conduct, which we installed in 2015. And the entire premise and reason for that was because we were taking a look at the data that illustrated that there was great disproportionality in our system around how students were treated when it came to suspensions, referrals, et cetera, right? Disciplinary matters. And so the Code of Conduct came into place, and it gave principals and school leaders, administrators, an outline, right, that they can react to in terms of what really constitutes an incident or something that occurs where you're suspending or looking for a placement out of school, et cetera. So it really outlined the behaviors, the actions, and I think most importantly, the mindset that we want to take around challenges as they occur with our students. And so our mindset is one that we understand that challenges will come, and our reaction to that has to be proportionate. So the code of conduct came in 2015, and we saw a decrease in suspensions in Montgomery County Public Schools. In fact, we have one of the lowest suspension rates in the nation. In being transparent, while we have one of the lowest suspension rates in the nation, we still need to address the disproportionality. And so our evolution with that thinking is right alongside everything that we've heard our colleagues say today. And so I'd like to be additive and not repetitive. We definitely recognize that the health and mental health and well-being of our students is a top priority in our county. And to that end, we've done several things that I would like to highlight briefly, and I know time is of the essence. First and foremost, we have our Be Well 365 program, which we've installed this year. That is a wraparound program that we're looking to build out in future years that takes a specific and intentional look at the mental health and well-being of our students through a variety of mediums. And within that is restorative justice, one of the 6 essentials. I was happy to be able to have the opportunity to spearhead that work, and that restorative justice component really speaks to giving not only second, third chances, changing mindset and behavior and practice in schools. So we've been training our schools. We do have 207 schools in Montgomery County. We have about 125 of our schools across level participating who have been trained in restorative justice and restorative practices. And so we're looking to continue on that work and on that mindset. Within Be Well 365 also is that mental and behavioral health, looking at suicidal ideation. How are we responding? How are we reacting? How are we building in? And how are we partnering? And I think the most important piece and recommendation, I think this conversation is extremely timely because the school system as a single entity, we cannot do it alone. That coordinated system of care is necessary. We have many existing partnerships currently, but if you take a look at how we've structured our school system, we've said to our instructors, our teachers, our leaders, if you come together in a professional learning community where you're in the same room at the same time and you're talking about the students, you're looking at the data, and then you're talking about what you're going to do next if the students aren't learning, if they aren't responding the way that you would like them to in reference to that student achievement component, we have that built in. So the instructional piece, we've been able to see great gains with that in Montgomery County. I think we need to build in the same practices for when we talk about social emotional learning, health, and well-being. We have to have those PLC models in place. So we need to be in the same room with the judges. We need to be in the same room with the lawyers. We need to be in the same room with the families who are affected by these things, where we're talking and we're coordinating. I think that was the one reverberating fabric, the thread that I heard throughout today's presentations, that coordination of care. How do we come together with everyone where we're talking about looking at the data together and we're able to address what are the next steps that each of our agencies will take so that we have that wraparound connective services for our students. So I think those were a couple of things that I wanted to highlight, and I certainly want to give my counterparts the opportunity to address that. But I think training, coordination of care, looking at our data and our practices are really instrumental to how we can move the needle on mental health and well-being and disproportionality in our county.
Thank you very much. Please.
And I would echo the coordination of care as a key component. I think if we're going to look at where we can make the most progress in terms of the bang for our buck, is looking at the connective tissue between our agencies and what are those connective pieces. And the Office of Special Education can sometimes operate in a silo for students for whom there's that line that's been drawn. A student has been determined to be eligible for special education services. We pick it up for there, and then we provide those services. But we have done a much better job of collaborating even within Montgomery County over the last few years with our curriculum office. When it comes to the identification of students with disabilities, for those who don't know, Montgomery County is right around the national average. We're not identifying students at a greater rate or much lower rate than other school systems around the country. So the number or percentage of students that are being identified doesn't seem to really be at issue. But what I hear, when I listen to all the testimony today is that there are a lot of students for whom, they may have challenges, learning challenges that may not necessarily be the result of a disability. Maybe they needed to learn the information differently, maybe needed to be presented differently. And so that's where I think we've made some progress. We're rolling out new curriculum over the course of the next 3 years. We're taking on this other component of Be Well 365 to add in some of the behavioral that also have curriculum pieces that will be in place later on. So, getting to those students earlier on so that they may not be identified or have to be labeled as a student with a disability, I think is a big piece of the puzzle. And I think that's something that we're directly taking on with this 3-year rollout of new curriculum. We have new interventions that we've kind of broken down the barriers on. There was a time where we said as a system, you need to have the label in order to access certain resources and services, and we're breaking down those barriers and saying, you know what, some students need those resources and services earlier on, and there shouldn't be any barriers to receiving those, because the student may just need the information differently in order to learn, so that they're not sitting in the principal's office and saying, I'm frustrated, upset because I can't learn. So that in that area, we've made some strides, and we're going to continue to work on the preventative piece of that work. The other piece that I just wanted to talk a little about is the parent outreach component that we continue to make progress on, but I will admit it continues to be a struggle, and I heard that come out in a lot of the testimony today. So some of the things that we've done in our office to try to make improvements around the special education process and make it more accessible, make it more transparent, are to have community workshops. Over the last 3 years, we started doing these evening workshops that are regional. We invite parents to come out to learn about the beginning stages of the process, and we try to differentiate those sessions so that if you're a parent that's not in the process yet, or you're new to it, you have something for you there. If you're a parent who's experienced in the process and you need to know more, we have something for you there. So that's been something that we've expanded over the last few years. We also have upgraded. If you looked on our website, there's a lot of kind of very simple language materials for, again, parents that need to information about entering the process, and experienced parents about how to help navigate certain IEP meetings. So our resources that are online have come a long way. They can be translated into the top 6 languages. IEPs now, and this came through some changes in COMAR, can be translated in the top 6 languages. There are significant resources that we put towards without full funding from the state to translate IEPs that are 40-some page documents into those languages. So that's something that we've gotten better at. So we've made some progress along that. The challenge I see as the directors when I go to those events, I often see the same families. I see the same families at my monthly parent advisory committee meetings. It's how to broaden that we still need to work on. How do we get to those other places where those families who need that information earlier how do we access those families? So we'll continue to work on that, but we have made some strides in that area. I worked as a special educator in a school that had linkages to learning, and I will testify, that was a huge support to us in terms of making sure that within that building there was seamless supports for parents, and we collaborated between special education and linkages. As a special education supervisor, I supervised high schools that had wellness centers, and I saw how that worked seamlessly. When it comes to those types of resources, I think there's some volume challenges. It would be great to have those services in all of our schools. That would be wonderful. I think that we can all sit and talk to things that we're doing on a certain scale, and then there's the piece about scaling things up. So I think that's a piece of the conversation as well. But certainly we have models that we can look at when it comes to that type of collaboration. There's some scale issues that I think that we need to address as a county. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please.
So I am working directly with the Chief Academic Officer to oversee a recent pilot that we have entered into with the Department of Justice and the Maryland State Department of Education at the short-term facility Noise, which is in Rockville. And this is an effort of MCPS to further extend our services to students who are currently in the juvenile justice system, and to facilitate a smooth transition in and out of those facilities in terms of academics. So as a result of House Bill 1607, this school system entered into an agreement with the state and with the juvenile services, the juvenile justice school system, which is a parallel school system that runs parallel to MCPS in the county, to pilot a management model at the Noyes facility, an educational management model. The three main objectives of that management model is to ensure that credits are being transferred once a student leaves that facility, whether they're going for a longer, whether they're being transferred into a longer period of detention or they're returning to their community school. And to make sure, and to work with families side by side to make sure that that transition is seamless, in addition to improving the educational program within the facility. We are experiencing some of the systemic challenges that exist between agencies, and as a result, myself and the two executive directors, one from MSD and the other from DJS, meet on a monthly basis to work through some of these things. For example, our ability to offer online credit recovery, which is sometimes in conflict with some of the technology procedures and guidelines that DJS has in terms of students being able to access technology. We just last week began to work with some of our neighboring jurisdictions. We visited the Youth Services Center, which is a short-term facility in the District of Columbia, to talk with DCPS staff and their additional staffers on how their relationship is working, their educational program, and their ability to transfer credits. We also supported, MCPS just recently supported their back to school night with individuals from Rochelle's office to provide parents with information on MCPS programs and services, so that when their children do transition from the facility, whether they go to a longer term facility or whether or not they return to the community, parents can be prepared on programs and services that MCPS offers, those application deadlines, and can have a program or a plan for their children when they leave. This is a period of exploration and learning for MCPS, and it's interesting. The pilot ends next year in 2020. We just began in July, so it's very, very early. We are adding additional staffing to their current staffing model, to include additional special education staffing and a transition specialist that will focus on the academic transition of students from either one facility to another facility, back to their community school, because 90% of the children that are in that center are currently came from MCPS schools. And to work in collaboration with the court liaison to make sure that that transition is not only a transition of services, but it's also an academic transition for children.
Thank you very much. Please.
So, how can I start? So, I guess coming to this position in 2017, I had an opportunity to follow my predecessor, Karen Gross, who was before me, and Daryl Norwood, and reading all about him and his great work they have done. But things have changed since Daryl Norwood. So I work with a lot more people than normal. So I work with 54 PPWs. I work with a lot of case managers with DJS, school counselors, administrators, attorneys, judges, different offices at MCPS with special education, and so I'm constantly trying to keep working to transition the students back to a comprehensive school to make sure they're successful, by making sure we provide resources to help and support them. And so one resource I was thinking about when she said about careers outside of college, MCPS is about to launch that new program where there are going to be more resources for students to do those technical programs at other schools. So now I'm about to go back and have conversations with case managers to find about those programs to help them out as well. So I'm constantly kind of moving around, trying to make sure the students are successful, but then also making sure my colleagues as people personnel workers, making sure they are working with the students as well. So it's really collaborating with a lot of different people and making sure we all communicate. Could it be better? Yes. It's still a work in progress? Yes. And so I'm trying to make sure I'm accessible as much as I can. Whenever Judge Smith calls me or send me an email, I do come to court right away and answer questions as soon as possible. And anybody who ever emails me know that I will answer an email really quickly, or I'll pick up my phone and call you just to see how I'll help and support. So that's what I do. I kind of do a lot. I'm always running across the county just to make sure students are in schools as quickly as possible. And so that's the best way I can support, and I continue to keep supporting students that way.
And how often are you actually in the courtroom?
So what I like this year, because every judge cycle has been different, and they utilize me differently. I like how Judge Smith is doing it. So she'll send an email requesting me to come to court. And we actually talked briefly about looking at a day in a week where I can just come to talk to students about the things they need to do for our schools. So special education, advocating for more additional services. So typically, schools just started. So it has been like once a week so far, especially they request me. But I'm constantly in schools now trying to make sure students are in school.
Okay. Thank you. Councilmember Rice, please.
So I guess I'll start with you, because I think that you do a lot and you're asked to do a lot. And it's similar to what my challenge was with Mr. Cardona before we built up his department, in terms of having the staffing appropriate so that you can do all those things. And so it's not something to say that you're not doing what you need to do. It's just that you need more. And certainly I think that having a representative that's in the courtroom all the time representing MCPS students is something that should be a part of the budget. And so as chair of the Education and Culture Committee, I'll certainly be bringing that up with Dr. Smith. It certainly is a line item that I think is worthwhile in terms of providing the resources. There's no reason why it shouldn't be there. I haven't heard anyone say anything that it's a waste of time or that it's not something that would be positive. And it sounds to me as though, especially since you're spread very thin, and even with your 54 PPWs that you have, you've got tons of responsibilities. Trust me, I know. We could just talk to Councilmember Katz's wife about it. We know all too well what responsibilities our PPWs have, let alone beside that, then having to be a resource for the court system in terms of ensuring that they have all the information about the student who's before a judge at that time. And so from that perspective, I do think that the additional resources are warranted. I will just say generically, when we talk about responsibilities, and it was interesting because Ms. Brown had brought it up about the start of where our kids are in terms of how these issues start to develop very quickly soon. And so, and earlier, and present themselves, whether it's a mental health condition, whether it's the need for special services to support that child. And it is, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention about the Kerwin Commission for Innovation and Excellence in Education, because it does have a number of of recommendations that a lot of folks have talked about today. One which is more robust pre-K, early childhood education that deals specifically with identifying whether or not we have issues with our children and being able to give them the support necessary, as well as bringing the parents in and getting them more involved and engaged right away when that happens. So that early identification makes it a lot easier, because then they're able to embrace and understand what the responsibilities and what their rights are, and have all of that there. When it comes to CTE, to our career and college readiness, for our career and technical education, those are things that are recommendations as well. So ensuring that if school isn't speaking to our kids, which oftentimes is a part of what happens when our children become disengaged, right? It's something to where I don't want to learn about world history. I do care about cars, though, and I'm learning everything I can about cars, and getting that child and saying that, well, some of this is important. You still need to have this background knowledge, so let's carry you through 10th grade in terms of giving you as much of that information as possible, and then after that, let's get you into your specialty so that you can focus on, if you're focused on cars, or if you want to do cosmetology, or if you want to do construction, or if you want to do culinary, whatever it is, let's get you in those tracks. That's also a part of the Kerwin recommendations. And last but not least, the family engagement piece is the biggest part of this, and is really something where I've seen MCPS make strides, but I think that more can be done when it comes to partnering with our health and human services. because they're doing that work when it comes to that engagement, and our nonprofit community, they're involved in that. When I think about family services that are out there, all these other entities to where that's their job, is to do this. And so partnering and building those stronger relationships. I know that you know them. I know that you talk with them. But in terms of even when you're crafting what it is that's your new methodology, having them engaged and involved at the table and saying, hey, you know, what is it that, you know, we're building this new kind of framework. What do you recommend as ways in which we can encapsulate and incorporate them together? Makes complete sense, right? And so it doesn't mean that we have to press a reset button and start over. It just means that we start those collaborative conversations now about how we can continue to develop and evolve the program so that it meets all of those needs. So again, one takeaway from this is definitely when it comes to budgetary, and I'll be seeing Dr. Smith, so I will bring that up with him personally, but I do feel as though that's one definite takeaway that we will have. We've heard the concern from our court system and from others who have said that they want to have somebody who's there as that point person all the time. Why not? It's certainly worth it from our perspective, and it's certainly from your perspective will allow you to do all the other things that you have to do as well. So that's kind of my takeaway.
Thank you very, very much. And I have heard a little bit about being a people personnel worker over a few years. Yeah, my wife did that for only 20 years. And she was a speech and language pathologist before that. I've heard a little bit about that as well. Where do we go from here? What is the next step for us? We need many steps, but what would be the next step?
Well, I think I should consult with you and the folks who have been here.
Okay.
Try to come up with at least some concrete work plan steps. I think the discussion about the model in DC, since it is our neighbor.
Absolutely, I think it's great.
I think that the information about what HHS is doing, but in particular, the question has been, how can we get better coordinated case management and assessment, and whether for the population we're talking about who has had some problems. So I'm going to, at the moment, set aside the really important issue of hopefully not having them ever have the problems. But once you have some kind of behavior that shows a DJS involvement or perhaps a police involvement, but the question, I think, has been where is the best place to do an assessment, making sure we have the appropriate assessments, and then making sure we have the right kinds of programs to serve those individualized needs. And so the other thing I think you've all mentioned is to take a look at programs we have, because we should use the resources we have, make sure the resources we have are being most effective. So for example, the Youth Opportunity Center, are there things that we can do there so that we don't have to create a whole new program, but that we can serve people who need a place to go to get services, those kinds of things. So I think my takeaway is trying to get some concrete steps for work plans and seeing how best we can really address some of these issues. Obviously, a clear one in budget can be around the juvenile court liaison, but I think there are some other ones that might be ready by budget as well if they need budgetary changes. But I've heard a few here that might. So.
Well, thank you, Linda. We know you have plenty to do, and this is another thing for you to do, but we really believe that you are the person that can help us get through this. I know that, and that we can get a better system, coordinated better system in Montgomery County, and that's what we're after. So, yes, ma'am.
To Councilmember Hucker's point earlier, we are also looking at the Philadelphia school system and a diversion school program that they have in collaboration, which looks excellent. We actually are in conversation with them to learn much more about it, but it's right along the lines of what you were mentioning about those the court systems that are based on mental health and everything, and theirs is a partnership with their police system as well as DJS, so it might be something else to look at.
Absolutely.
I actually want to say, and I want to make sure that however we set it up by committee, that we come back to this issue of how the noise pilot is working out, because I will say this, many years ago, MCPS provided the education services at noise, and people were very upset when that changed, because what MCPS was able to do was there was no question that the credits that the youth earned while they were in noise were being done by a school system with appropriate teachers. And while most of the youth in noise are Montgomery County, go back to Montgomery County Public Schools, not all of them would. And MCPS was, I think, really in a unique position to liaison with those other school systems as well, to make sure that every youth could have all the work they've done, get them credit when they went back to their home school, wherever that is. So I'm very excited, sort of what goes around comes around, but it's very exciting. And I think, we need to, you all should follow up on the pilot in case there's any advocacy you need to do to decide what's permanent.
Please, very quickly, please.
And the one thing about this pilot is that we are literally the only school system in the state of Maryland that elected to participate. So it has implications for the entire state.
Thank you.
So I do appreciate, because that's a conversation we always have when the students are transitioning out about the credits. But I love Ms. Poge at Noise because I can call her if they went to Noise at one point. She'll work with me so we can make sure they get that half a whole credit instead of when they go out of state placements, it's a little bit harder. So the students do become frustrated because in one place they say they graduate and when they come back they're not. And so I do appreciate having that good connection with Noise so we can able to work with the students so they can graduate.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all very, very much for being with us and for working with us. This will continue, believe me.